Welcome back to Creepy Vibes. Tonight, we journey into the sweltering depths of a Texas summer night, where every cicada song hides a whisper of terror and every starless sky conceals unspeakable dread. We've scoured abandoned ranches, desolate rivers, and lonely highways to bring you 20 of the most disturbing, true horror tales this state has ever dared to whisper, and chances are, you've never heard them before. Before we plunge into the darkness, one warning. Most viewers make the fatal mistake of leaving without subscribing. Don't miss out on the rest of these spine-chilling stories. Hit that subscribe button now. Because once you learn what lurks in the Texas night, there's no turning back. So, where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Drop your location and local hour in the comments below. The night is still young, and the real horror is only just beginning. Let's dive into 20 Texas summer night horror stories you've never heard before. The sky split open with a crack so loud it felt like the world had fractured. The lake answered with a rush of water lashing the shore, dragging driftwood and broken sandcastles back into its depths. I'd been camping with Jenna and Marcus for 3 nights, chasing the promise of warm summer winds and soft waves until that first lightning strike. We huddled in our flimsy tent as sheets of rain hammered the nylon roof, our mouths pressed against the mesh door, hearts pounding. Marcus swore he saw a man step from the lake in that flash, tall and thin, his body slick and dark as wet asphalt. Jenna shook her head, blamed the wind and our nerves. I wanted to believe her, but I'd felt those eyes on me, like cold steel. The next morning, the storm had blown off toward the panhandle, leaving the beach half mud and half shattered shells. We emerged from our tent to a sky that looked guilty, bruised purple at the edges. The water was calm, mirror flat, but I still noticed footprints, 2 long, narrow impressions leading out of the lake onto the sand, then vanishing at the tide line. I called Jenna and Marcus over. Their faces went white when they saw them. No one else camped nearby. No one could explain those prints, except the story Marcus spat out. The lightning man returns after every storm, they said, to claim someone. Foolish enough to stay, someone whose name he whispers at the water's edge. We laughed nervously, packed quickly, and drove off in our old Chevy's cloud of dust. The road back to Fort Worth was empty, just miles of hot pavement and fields that shimmered in the heat. But when we reached my apartment, Jenna's cat was pacing the balcony, fur bristled, eyes fixed on the pool. "It must be waterborne," she said, voice low and serious. "This thing follows the water." We shrugged it off. It was drafty logic, but none of us wanted to admit fear. That night, I lay awake listening to the thunder ricocheting off the downtown towers. I'd promised myself I was safe now, miles from the lake. But every flash of lightning through my window stirred a memory. Long limbs winding through breakers, that featureless face reflecting each spark. When the storm hit the city, roaring traffic slowed to a crawl. Rain spattered the windshield like shards of glass. My radio buzzed with police scanners reporting flooded streets and fallen power lines. I glanced at the clock. 3:17 a.m. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You stayed." I froze. The text glowed pale against the dark. My fingers shook as I tried to reply, but my thumbs moved too slowly. Another message. "He found you." The third, "Run." I leapt from bed, heart hammering. In the flicker of the streetlight through my curtains, I thought I saw a dark shape on the balcony, too tall and thin to be Jenna's cat. I crept to the window, peered through the raindrops. Silence. Then a flash lightning slicing the sky, and I saw him. Standing on the balcony edge, fists clenched at his sides, body gleaming wet. The lightning man of Lake Worth. His eyes were hollows of blackness, as if they were carved out by hunger. He stared at me, and I swore his mouth curled into something like a smile before he slipped off the railing and vanished into the rain. I didn't sleep. Around first light, I packed everything I owned into my car, pulled away so fast I left tire tracks in the wet driveway. I headed north with Jenna on the phone, murmuring prayers. Marcus wouldn't answer. I hoped he was safe, but I knew that Sunday's storm would chase us all. The thunder returned as I crossed Denton County, grew louder. When I turned east on Route 380, rain pelted the hood, beads of water racing each other toward the bumper. I caught glimpses of movement at the roadside, a tall figure stepping out of a flooded ditch, skin dark and wet, limbs as long as tractor beams. I slammed the brakes, fishtailed across 2 lanes, granite heartbeat in my chest. No one was there. When I stepped out, only empty water rising over the shoulder. I drove until my eyes burned, until the swirling clouds mellowed into dusk. I found myself back on the coast, the ocean's roar greeting me like a revenant. The wind left my hair plastered, stung my cheeks with salt. I'd bought a runabout on impulse, determined to find the source of this nightmare. Jenna sounded frantic over the phone, but agreed to meet me at an old pier in Galveston. When I arrived, the wood planks sagged under my weight. The sea was ink, the waves low, subdued. No storm yet, the air flickered with static. And there, at the very end of the pier, silhouetted by the dying sun, was the Lightning Man. He stood poised, arms hanging straight, head tilted as if listening. I stumbled forward, breath catching in wet lungs. Lightning cracked above us as if in greeting, and the world split open again. The Lightning Man stepped forward, each motion jerking like a puppet's limb, too mechanical, too precise. The water behind him lapped at the pilings, hungry. I called Jenna's name, but my voice felt small. He raised an arm-long, narrow fingers pointing at me. The pier groaned. Splinters kicked up under my boots. Behind me, water surged. Why? I shouted into the gathering gloom. The second crack of lightning came, and he spoke in a voice like static on the radio, a high, buzzing whisper that seeped into my bones. You listened. Before I could move, the pier collapsed beneath my feet. I fell into the black water, the chill ripping through me. I surfaced, arms thrashing to find something solid. The world above was a smear of lightning and rain. I kicked toward a broken beam, hauled myself onto it, chest heaving. I dared to look back at the pier. The Lightning Man stood on the remains, rain cascading off his body like blood. He raised his arms in a slow, impossible wave. I sank into the water up to my waist and began to wade toward shore. The muddy bottom sucked my boots down. Every step was agony, but I kept going, hearing that whisper chasing me. Don't look back. I nearly stumbled, face slapping the water, but I forced myself forward. My phone slipped from my pocket, flickered underwater, drained and died. All I had was the lightning above and the shape in the rain. When I reached the sand, I turned around. The shoreline was empty. The tide retreated, leaving behind driftwood and footprints partially erased by the breaking waves. No sign of him except the footprints leading from the water onto the beach, then fading into the dunes. I stood there, rain soaking my clothes, heartbeat still echoing, and I whispered a promise I didn't believe. Not anymore. I limped back to my car, drove until the road ended at a cluster of gas station lights. I checked my rearview mirror 100 times. Nothing. No pale figure, no slick body trailing me. I reached Jenna's place in Beaumont just as the sky collapsed into night again. She ran to meet me, hands trembling, eyes red. I crawled from the car and collapsed on her porch, staring at the darkened street. The cicadas buzzed like a choir of the damned. Behind me, I thought I heard footsteps slow, measured, coming closer. I swallowed. He's here, I told Jenna. Voice thick, she took my hand, guided me inside. The door shut and locked. We huddled in the living room, lights off, windows sealed. Storm clouds gathered outside, and I knew the lightning man was out there, waiting for the next flash, waiting for one of us to slip into the dark. He's patient, I whispered. He always comes back. Jenna held me through the night, but I couldn't stop watching the windows. Each crack of thunder made me flinch. Each flash of lightning made me pray. I knew then that the lightning man of Lake Worth wasn't confined to a single place. He followed the water, followed the storms, and now he had followed me home. I vowed I would leave Texas. I would chase the sun to California, to Maine, to anywhere he couldn't find me. But as the rain began to fall against the glass, I realized with a cold certainty that no matter where I went, he would be there at the first flash, stepping from the rain, searching for someone to follow home. And I would be running, always, running until the world ended or I collapsed in exhaustion, the lightning man's whisper ringing in my ears, "Don't look back." The wind came first, drifting across the scrub flats like an animal too tired to roar. I remember waking in the old farmhouse to the sound of cicadas, but this was wrong, this was symphony. It wasn't the frantic drone of thousands of insects. It was a chorus, male and female voices weaving in perfect thirds and fifths, rising and falling with uncanny precision. That spring, the first year I'd lived in Marfa Falls, I thought someone had rigged speakers in the mesquite trees. Some prank pulled on the new teacher. But when I crept out onto the porch, half dressed in nightclothes and hard hammering like a jackrabbit, I saw no wires, no lantern or porch light, just the darkness and the silent clapboard house behind me. Still, the music drifted, a lament woven in minor chords, then a sudden shift into a serene major that made my skin tingle with false hope. The rhythm slowed. The song ended, hanging in the air like a breath exhaled too soon, and then I swear, I heard a single high note held too long, something that might have been a voice letting go of itself. People say you learn the language of a place by listening. I learned Marfa Falls's tongue on those nights, and I should have left then. I should have listened to Sheriff Haywood when he said no one moved here without carrying something they were running from. But I was fresh out of fear. I was 28, armed with idealism and crayons, teaching art to children who painted. Cacti with 2 brilliant strokes of green. I laughed at tales of the cicada choir old Mrs. Cotter swore her brother Van died for trying to record their song, that his tape ran backwards in the player, and the last thing she heard was him screaming. Her name? That made me laugh harder, until she fixed me with eyes the color of a storm cloud and whispered, "They sing your name too, sweetheart, if you ever stay long enough." It was midsummer that things turned. The nights grew hotter, and the song grew stronger, crystal clear in the hush after sunset. I began to notice patterns. On the edge of the song, there was always a high trill that sounded almost like a child giggling no, a child sobbing. Then, no matter where I was, I'd feel it. The hair rising on my arms, the skin along my spine tightening, an itch I couldn't scratch. My dreams became sickly, sweet, endless fields of pale moths drifting over tombstones, and something with too many legs scuttling beneath them, whispering in a voice like dry leaves. It hummed my name at the boundaries of consciousness. I woke each dawn drenched in sweat, heart pounding, as if I'd raced all night. That year the Harvest Festival came late. We decorated the town square with colored streamers and picnic tables. Mrs. Cotter sold chocolate-dipped pecans, and the high school band blared deep in the heart of Texas. At dusk, the cicadas began. The notes rose above the brass horns, above the twang of guitars, and the crowd stilled. I watched faces turn upward, mouths half open as if tasting the air. The song wrapped around us, easy and familiar, until the tiva Melody shifted, a darkened version of itself, and an emptiness spread through my chest. I blinked, and I saw it. A girl, no more than 10, standing in the shadows beyond the lights. Her head tilted back, mouth open wide, humming. Her eyes were black hollows, and as I stared, her lips peeled back into a grin too long for her small face. Then the song stopped, and the hush that followed was so deep that someone halfway across the square screamed out in the days after it was hard to find the girl. Parents said their children were safe at home. Teachers shook their heads and whispered about heat stroke. But I saw her in the grocery store, dragging a finger along the shelves, humming that trill, humming my name. I cornered her in the canned beans aisle, my pulse pounding so hard I thought I'd bleed out through my ears. "What are you?" I hissed. Her head swung slow as a pendulum. "They sang me here," she said, voice thin as wind through tombstones. "They want you." Then she laughed, and the sound echoed, and I stumbled back against the shelves as if struck. That night I burned sage in every room, chased it with incense borrowed from the church. I prayed. I played my father's old country records, anything, to drown out the choir. My ears rang, but I slept, fitfully, and dreamed of hands wrapped around my ankles, tugging me down into dark water. When I woke, there was a single whisper bruise on my throat. I packed my car at dawn, threw everything I owned into the trunk: suitcases, canvas paintings half finished, textbooks, and broken coffee mugs. I drove toward the interstate, letting the rising sun warm my back, thinking I'd outrun that song. But when night fell, I found myself on a dirt road north of town, headlights dead. I stepped out to check the engine, and the cicadas began. They sang around me in a ring of sound-perfect harmonies, flickering with longing. They sang of loneliness, of wanting someone to hear, of needing release. Then came that trill, and underneath it, I thought I heard a voice: sacrifice. I ran back to the car until my lungs burned, but the door handle melted beneath my hand. I fell against the hood, and the song closed in, stroking my tears from my cheeks with invisible fingers of air. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, careful, and I turned, expecting the girl. But the world was empty except for the echo of the choir. The footsteps crossed behind me, and then a cold breath against my ear. It's time. My heart pounded. As I turned back to the road, and there she was, the girl from the festival, standing in the center of the dirt path, eyes shining in the beam of my flashlight. She tilted her head, humming that trill. "They're waiting," she said. Her grin flickered, and suddenly dozens of tiny bodies dropped from the mesquite branches above cicadas, but human-sized, their shells split to reveal eyes like wet opals and mouths shaped in stories they couldn't tell. They swarmed around her in a slowly spinning dance, and the girl raised one pale hand, pointing at me. "I choose you," she whispered, and her voice cracked like old wood. The chorus surged to a crescendo, and in the flash of that moment, I saw them all, faces pressed against the leaves and bark of every tree, eyes unblinking in the darkness, mouths open in silent song. Then everything went quiet. A single note held, stretched beyond reason, and the world tilted. I closed my eyes, waiting for the end. When I dared to open them, dawn was breaking, gray light spilling over the horizon. The road was empty, no girl, no cicadas, no car. My jacket lay on the ground, damp with dew. In the distance I heard the faintest echo of a song, rising toward the sky and fading with the light. Some mornings, I wake and think I'm safe, that I've left Marfa Falls behind me for good. But in the quiet before sunrise, when the world is still, I hear it. The first trill of that impossible choir, the promise of harmonies too perfect to be natural. And I know they're still singing my name. The heat off the asphalt bloomed in wavering waves, like a living thing breathing in the black of night. John Beckett's old Ford sputtered its last breath 3 miles outside of Terlingua. The desert town reduced now to a few shuttered storefronts and the skeletal remains of old rigs. He eased the car to a halt, the engine clicking down to silence, then felt the desert wind press against his skin warm, hungry, a whisper that promised secrets if he listened close enough. He stepped out, the solace of his boots scuffing against the hard-packed gravel, and shouldered the duffel he'd stuffed with nothing more than a change of shirt and a precious 2-liter bottle of water. He uncapped the bottle and took a swallow, already tasting the grit of sand on his tongue. The headlights faded behind him. Nothing but the moon, a distant smudge, and the faint orange glow of street lamps in town. No radio signal, no passing cars, nothing but the desert breathing. He checked his phone no bars. He muttered a curse and looked down the highway, thinking about walking until he found a gas station, a diner, someone. But something made him stay, an itch at the back of his skull. A sense that whatever lurked beyond the circle of his headlights might be listening. And then the light appeared, a pulsing electric blue. At first he thought it was another car's neon underglow, some kid's prank. But as it drew nearer, he saw the shape. A tall man on horseback, striding along the asphalt like he owned it. The horse's hooves made no clatter. They glided across the ground as though the cowboy and his mount were part of a liquid glow, their edges blurred by the neon sheen of their chaps and saddle. The cowboy's hat brim threw a dark shadow over his face, yet beneath it glowed 2 slits of pale light where eyes should have been. He seemed tethered to the road by that glow, as though the asphalt fed him electric life. John felt the bottle slip from his sweaty fingers. He watched, heart pounding, as the cowboy approached, the neon in his chaps flickering, sometimes blue, sometimes violet, sometimes a harsh green, as if breathing, as if alive. The horse exhaled steam that shimmered with the same unnatural color before dissolving into the night. And still John stood frozen, a spectator to something that should not be. When the cowboy stopped a few feet from him, he raised a hand and tipped the brim of his hat. His voice came then, low and calm, like distant thunder. "Need some water, stranger?" The voice echoed strangely, as though coming through an amp. A bottle appeared in the cowboy's freehand clear plastic, identical to John's own, filled to the cap. He held it out. Thirst, like a blind beast, roared in John's throat. He realized his own water bottle was empty, or nearly so. The desert sun had drunk most of it, leaving only sand and regret. He should have turned away. He should have run. But he saw the condensation on the plastic, saw the pure clarity of the liquid inside. "Sure," he croaked, stepping forward. The cowboy's hand was pale where it gripped the bottle, too pale, almost translucent. His fingers seemed elongated joints knotted at strange angles. John hesitated, but the desert wind pressed so close he could almost taste the heat on his tongue. He took the bottle and brought it to his lips, the plastic crinkling under his fingers like a whisper. One long swallow and he froze. The water burned cold as ice in his throat, a slash of frost that spread into his chest. He blinked, felt his legs buckle, but the cowboy slid up beside him, silent, the horse shifting. "Good," the cowboy murmured, and the glow in his chaps pulsed. John staggered back, the bottle falling from his hand. He wiped his mouth, his throat tight, and tried to speak, but the words tangled. The world around him grew darker, the night pressing in like a closeting fear. Stars vanished behind midnight fog. The desert silence thickened. "Who are you?" John managed to gasp. The cowboy's hat lifted slightly, and John caught sight of the pale gleam beneath it, a skull perhaps, or a face stretched too tight over bone, eyes like dying coal embers. "A friend," the figure said. His voice dripped with sweetness, like honey laced with arsenic. I'm what you need out here." John felt limbs go heavy. He wanted to take another swig, to wash away the cold, but his body would not respond. He tried to move, tried to step back, but the highway seemed to stretch on forever, the black ribbon of tar melting into the horizon. He was trapped in a circle of neon light that hummed softly, a lullaby for the damned. Time blurred. He saw fragments. The cowboy's boots sliding across his own, the hiss of static like voices in the dark, the horse's eyes glowing the same sickly hue. He felt his heart slow, a metronome skipping beats. Then the cowboy was there, close, smelling of ozone and rain, of something metallic and old. He reached out, fingers brushing John's temple, and a spark jolted through his skull. John's vision fractured. He saw himself on this very road, same clothes, same pale desert air, except then he walked away, confident, whole. He saw laughter from a neon-lit diner, his reflection in the rearview mirror smiling. And then the vision shattered. Like a cracked mirror, and he was back at the dusty roadside, trembling. The cowboy stood, distant now, as if summoned away. "Don't worry," he said, his voice drifting on the wind. "You'll find your way." He touched the brim of his hat once more, and then he and his horse vanished, leaving only the faintest neon afterglow that winked out like a dying spark. John slumped to the ground, the bottle close at hand. He crawled to it and raised it as if in supplication, but the water inside rippled, turning black. He dropped it. His throat burned, but thirst remained, gnawing. He tried to speak. "Help!" he whispered into the emptiness. The highway remained silent. He stood unsteadily, waves of nausea washing through him. The desert air was colder now, tinged with the scent of rust and old blood. He looked down the highway. Headlights glowed far off, an illusion or salvation. Should he walk toward them? Would he reach them? The neon cowboy's promise echoed in his mind. Those who sip never leave. He put one foot in front of the other. Each step felt heavier, as if the road itself resisted him. The headlights shifted, grew brighter, then faded, revealed nothing but moonlit tracks in the sand. Behind him, the bottle lay broken, water seeping into the dust like spilled ink. John willed himself forward, the night pressing on both sides, the asphalt endless. He hammered his fists against his thighs, repeating one word over and over: "Move." The desert wind took his voice and carried it away, swallowed it whole. Somewhere ahead, a distant rumble and engine? Or a memory of one. He stumbled, the world spinning. And then the neon glow appeared again, ahead of him, drifting along the center line like a beckoning wraith. His heart leapt with hope and terror. He knew then that the cowboy would offer again, that he could refuse or drink, or perhaps find a way off this cursed road. But thirst was stronger than sense. He closed his eyes, took a trembling breath, and stepped into the glow. The sun had slipped behind the low hills by the time Lily Mendoza trudged into the first row of the cotton fields, her fingers already stiff with the chill that crept over the land once dusk fell. She tightened her jacket against the wind tapping, the dry stalks like impatient fingers, then bent to the work she'd known since she was a child, plucking the fluffy white blooms and dropping them into her sack. Around her, the others, mostly women and old men, moved in silent rhythm, heads bowed, shoulders stooped under the weight of long days. The air tasted of earth and dust, and somewhere beyond the fields an owl called once, twice, then fell quiet. Lily's grandmother used to warn her never to linger here after dark, to finish the rows and leave before the moon rose. "The cotton mouth's open," she'd whisper, voice quivering like a dying leaf, "and something reaches out." Lily had laughed then, but now she remembered that warning as she straightened and glanced down the endless furrows, where the quille for the endless furrows, where the teeth of Divines of enumered that warning as she straightened and glanced down the endless furrows, where the fee stalks shimmered pale in the last light. She ducked beneath the next crossrail and shoved her sack higher, breathing hard through her scarf. A soft moan drifted through the furrows, so faint she thought she'd imagined it. She paused, hard hammering, listening. The moan came again, a whimper, like a child calling for its mother, stretched thin and ragged by hours of sobbing. The other pickers carried on, their backs to her, but Lily felt a cold grip at her spine. She swallowed and leaned forward, peering down the row. The stalks rustled as though something had moved between them, sliding closer. "Hello?" she called, voice unfamiliar in her own ears. The wind picked up, carrying the sound away before it could answer. She bent down to gather another bowl of cotton, and the wind shifted. Beneath it, a whisper. "Help me." Lily froze, hands slick against the white fluff. The voice came again, desperate. "Please." She dropped the bowl. The rustling grew louder, frantic cotton stalks brushing cotton stalks, a shimmering movement just beyond sight. She swung her head, trying to catch a glimpse through the tangled rows. The sound repeated, closer now. "Help!" Panic seized her limbs. She should run, she knew that, but her feet felt rooted to the cracked soil. She straightened and called, voice rising. "I'm here. Where are you?" The stalks rattled violently, as if something pressed against them from the inside, pushing through the rows toward her. She saw a flicker of movement, a dark shape slipping between the trunks like smoke. A hand, slender and pale, emerged between the stalks, fingertips grazing the ground as if feeling for purchase. Lily stumbled back, bag thrust to the earth her, jacket snagging on a thorny branch. The hand moved again, closer. "Please," the voice insisted, now an echo of agony. The silhouette of a child took form in the twilight, too tall and too thin, ragged clothes hanging loose. Its eyes were hollow hollows, pits of darkness that swallowed what little light remained. Lily screamed and turned, running with the sack. Dragging behind her, the soft clicking of stalks flaying the air like the lashes of whip cracks. She didn't look back, but the voices followed her, rising in a chorus. "Help us! Help us!" She tore through the field's edge, her boots kicking pebbles, and the chant of voices faded as the distance grew. She burst onto the dirt access road, chest heaving, tears blurring her vision. The other pickers were gathering their tools, stepping past the field's boundary as though they'd never noticed the terror inside. "That storm's coming." An old man grunted, tucking his bucket under an arm. "Best be going." They climbed into battered trucks and pickups, headlights flicking on, then kicked engines into life and rumbled down the lane. Lily stood there, alone, clutching her sack, watching them disappear into the gathering gloom. She forced herself back to the rows, the whisper of voices still trailing in the air. Her knees shook as she bent to pick up her bag. Something stirred deep in the furrows, though no wind blew. Lily pressed her hand to her chest and steadied her breathing. The others would be gone, she thought. It was only her imagination. That's all. But then she saw them. Garment shirt sleeves, a blouse, a pair of overalls lying abandoned in neat little piles on the dry earth, as though their owners had simply stepped out of them and vanished. She crept closer, each step louder. In the hush of twilight, the clothes were empty, flattened by the soil, dew shimmering across their shoulders like the sheen of sweat on an unburied corpse. A child's sundress, stained with brown smudges, lay next to a pair of scuffed boots. Lily's heart thundered. In her ears, she stepped back, but the ground shifted, a low sigh under her boots. The stalks parted before her, revealing a narrow path leading deeper into the field's heart. And there, bathed in the moonlight that had at last risen, stood the silhouettes of people, shadows of pickers gone before, their forms half in cotton and half in darkness. They were translucent, bodies elongated, limbs bent at odd angles. There, mouths opened and closed in silent pleadings, and their eyes gleamed with cold desperation. Lily felt the wind die away, the night falling so still she could hear her own blood rushing. A chorus of whispers rose, swirling around her, pressing. In, "Help us, come closer, save us." She tried to scream, but her voice failed. The figures drifted forward, stalks brushing their ghostly sleeves against her cheeks, each touch leaving a trail of frost on her skin. She stumbled backward, tripping over a twisted root, and fell, hands skidding on the hard ground. She scrambled. Up, eyes fixed on the shapes approaching, her lungs burning for air. She turned and ran, stumbling toward the road, leaving her sack behind. She could hear their sorrowful cries echoing behind her. "Please, help us." She didn't stop until the truck lights appeared, until she was slammed into the passenger seat and the door slammed shut. The engine roared to life, and she buried her face against the vinyl door, shaking as the field slipped away under the wheels. The voices faded to nothing once the cotton fields were left behind, but Lily felt them inside her, a hollowness growing where her fear had burrowed. That night, in the small trailer she shared with her cousin, Lily lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. The moon cast a pale rectangle across the floor, and she could almost see the stalks swaying in the breeze of her memory. She prayed the dreams would stay away, but when she finally drifted off, it was to the sound of children sobbing and calling her name. When morning came, she returned to the field, couldn't stay away forever, she told herself, sack in hand. Boots scuffed. The stalks were still. No piles of clothes lay in neat abandon. No phantom voices climbed the rows. The pickers were already working, humming softly as they bent to their task. Lily breathed in the dusty air and stepped between the furrows, pretending she felt nothing more than the sun's warmth. But deep in the field's heart, something watched. A shape moved, a flicker of white cloth drifting across the ground. Lily paused, chest tightening, and looked closer. There, beneath the stalks, was a single boot, empty and caked in earth, beckoning her to remember. The heat pressed down through your shirt like a living thing, sticky and patient, whispering promises of sunstroke as the two of you picked your way along the limestone outcroppings of the hill country. The late afternoon was quiet except for the buzz of insects and the rasp of cicadas tuning up for their evening chorus. Even that felt distant, muted by the vastness of the rolling hills and the forests of ash juniper and live oak that stood like sentinels beneath the blazing sky. You talked about your exes and the way the wind shifts at dusk in these parts. But when the sun dropped behind the ridges, the forest swallowed your words. Shadows pooled where the hardy grasses thinned, and you felt that old itch in the back of your neck like someone was watching you from just beyond the trees. Your friend tried to joke it away, but you caught her hand at your side trembling. When she realized you felt it too, you found her when she slipped off the path, drawn by a flicker of golden light between the trunks. She was crouched at the edge of a small clearing, arms extended as if to gather something. You came up behind her, breathing the scent of damp soil and something almost sweet on the air. When you reached out, she turned and you saw her eyes were wide, gleaming in the gathering gloom. I thought it was fireflies," she whispered, voice thick and distant. Behind her, lantern after lantern, thousands of tiny, hovering sparks danced above an old stone you'd never seen on any map. The stones were worn, blackened in places, and the mouth of the well yawned like an open wound in the ground. But it was the figure kneeling there that stole your breath. She wore a wedding dress the color of dust. The lace hung in shreds from her shoulders and ankles, and the bodice sagged over her ribcage like wet parchment. Her hair was a mass of tangles, white as bone, drifting in the humid air. Yet around her, the fireflies spilled their light like a living halo, each one a flicker in the half-light. They swirled over her head, clung to her sleeves, and marked the hem of that ghostly gown in points of gold. Your heart hammered so hard. You could taste it. For a long moment she stayed locked on your friend's face, as if tracing the shape of her memories, her regrets. Then the bugs began to settle on her skin, drawn to the pale dead flesh as moths are to the flame. You saw her. Breath a puff of cold in the warm night that stirred the fireflies into a riot above her head. They whirred, and their lights flickered like a strobe. Your friend stumbled backward, a gasp tearing from her throat. The bride tilted her head, hair slipping away from her face to reveal hollowed cheeks and lips so thin they looked painted. "On, I waited," she said, voice a soft hiss that seemed to come from the well itself. "They all promised me. They said they'd come back." Your friend's feet found the edge of the clearing, but she didn't move away. Instead, she stood, riveted as if the bride had some power over her limbs. You grabbed her arm, shaking her free, but the moment your fingers slipped away, the fireflies winked out one by one, like tiny stars collapsing into nothingness. The dress lost its glow, the bride's form fading with every departed insect, until she was little more than a diaphanous silhouette. Then the well sighed, a low, hollow murmur that rattled your bones. And something rose from its depths, a shape amorphous and dark, with tendrils of smoke that curled around the stones. Your breath tangled in your chest as your friend's scream finally broke the spell. You both bolted, crashing through the scrub brush, tripping over roots and rocks. From behind you, the bride's laughter followed light as chimes, cold as the grave. It drifted through the trees, mocking and endless. You dared to glance over your shoulder and saw her standing at the edge of the clearing again, fireflies clustered around her once more, pulsing in time to your racing heart. The forest closed in behind you, branches slapping your face, vines grasping at your ankles. You didn't stop until the first stars pricked the sky above the highway. The roar of passing cars felt obscene after that quiet horror. You ran until your lungs burned and tears coursed down your cheeks. Only when you reached the pavement did you slow. Your friend collapsed beside you, chest heaving. You both pressed ears to the night, but heard nothing now but the wind sighing through the oaks and the faint hum of tires on asphalt. You dared to look back, but saw only the dark tree line, unremarkable under the pale glow of a street lamp. Neither of you spoke. In the soft hush of the passing headlights, you held each other until dawn. When morning came, you walked back to the trailhead in silence, leaves crunching underfoot like brittle bones. No sign of the well remained, just a shallow depression where the earth had settled. There were no tracks, no scraps of lace, no beetle wings or shattered glow. You swore you'd tell everyone it was just your imagination, a trick of the light, exhaustion, heat stroke. But at night, when the wind shifts and that hush falls over the hills, you both lie awake, listening. And sometimes, just sometimes, through the crack in your window, you see a pinpoint of light float. In the distance, so distant you almost convince yourself it's nothing, but deep in your chest you know it's not. The fireflies come home to the hill country, and she waits, in that shredded lace, for the next soul to wander into her clearing. And when the bugs begin to flicker out one by one, you remember her promise. They all promised me. And you know she intends to collect. The night air in Mesquite Grove tasted of wilted leaves and something older, something that lurked beneath the twisting limbs of those ancient trees. It was the kind of darkness that made sound disappear, stopped even the insects in their tracks, until you strained so hard to hear that your own heart began to echo in your ears. That hush settled over the grove like a shroud, swallowing moonlight whole. letting only the faintest glow slip through the knotted branches. It was past 3 in the morning, but to the dares of local children, it might as well have been midnight on the edge of eternity. They came in small, wobbly knots 4 or 5 at a time, laughing too loudly to mask the tremor in their voices. The dare was simple. Run from one end of the grove to the other, no stopping, no turning back. Reach the old stone well at the center before your feet sank in those loose roots. Touch its crumbling rim. Return, all by 3:15. That gave them 15 minutes to sprint through the lurching black and sprint back. And just like every October for as long as anyone could remember, some of them thought they were brave enough. They weren't dot at first. It looked like any other. Childish game of bravado shouts, dares, challenges sprinkled with nervous giggles. But as soon as the first pair of sneakers hit the gravel road, the hush retreated. Tiny pebbles hissed beneath their solace. Feet slapped the earth in a ragged rhythm. The others pressed around the curve of the road, craning their necks for a glimpse. The moon, a pale gash behind a curtain of clouds, revealed nothing but shifting shadows and the broken branches swaying like arthritic fingers. Amy Hernandez took her first steps into the grove. She felt it, a tremor under her boots, like the land itself had sighed in warning. She paused, head swiveling, as low laughter slipped from the shadows. Not childish laughter, but something old, intimate, cruel. She shook her head and ran on, her friends' voices calling behind her, urging her forward dot by the time she reached the well. Breath ragged and arms burning, the air tasted metallic. The stone rim felt damp, slick with moss that whispered through her fingers like black silk. She looked down and saw nothing but shadow, as if the well had swallowed its own bottom. The laughter returned, humming along the circumference of that hollow stone. Before she could yank her hand away, those voices threaded into her mind, names she'd never told anyone, memories she'd never spoken aloud. The countless times she'd crept out of her bedroom at night to sneak cigarettes behind the barn. The secret shape of her scar, her father's broken promises after too many beers. They spilled from her own stubborn heart, draining out without mercy. She stumbled back, fingers pressed against her ears, but the grove wasn't content to let her go. Roots snaked across the ground, tangling her legs. The branches overhead groaned, pressing down on her shoulders like the weight of 1,000 spying eyes. She screamed for her friends, but all they saw was an outline, a flurry of movement in the trees, and then nothing. Only the echo of her voice, swallowed by the night. When Amy's absence was noted at 3:20, the grove exhaled and settled. Again. In the hush that followed, the other children waited, counting heartbeats, fingernails digging into palms, until 4 of them decided it was safe enough to go searching, convinced she'd merely slipped away in fear. They found her at the edge of the trees, crouched and quivering like a wounded animal. Her eyes, wide with something older than terror, fixed on them as though they were intruders. She blinked, and for a moment they saw someone else behind those eyes. A girl they didn't know, a girl who knew things she never could have learned on her own. She wouldn't speak for days. When she finally did, her words tumbled out disjointed. They remember everything. Then she shook her head, as though to dislodge insects that had crawled into her skull, and refused to go back. Not there. Not again. A few nights later, another. Dared the grove and finished the run. Michael Tran made it to the well and back before 3:12, laughing with bent knees, his chest heaving. His friends cheered him, slapped him on the back, made him pant for his father's old watch, a junky Casio with a cracked face. But 2 days later, in science class, Michael sat slack in his chair, eyes dull. When the teacher asked a question, he stared at the ceiling, silent. His parents were called. The doctors ran tests. But in every examination, his eyes betrayed him. They flicked away whenever someone mentioned that night. "Tell me about Mesquite Grove," his mother begged one morning. Michael looked at the fins. Wall lips parted, then shook his head. "I don't know why I went," he said. "I don't know why I came back." His voice, hollow and thin, carried something impossible. He knew neither the dare nor the journey, but he remembered the grove remembering him. Remembering his secret shame, the gambling debts he whispered about under the bleachers, the word he carved into his desk. That was what stripped him bare, what left him husk and memory. It happened to every child who finished the dare. They returned, pale and broken in mind, straining for something they couldn't name. Their eyes trembled at the sight of groves anywhere, even on postcards, and they avoided the trees on the school's nature trail with a sudden furious dread. Parents complained of nightmares, of waking to their children screaming for oblivion, clinging to them as though they'd been chased by something that knew their grandfather's sins, their unspoken lies. Over time, the dare faded, the older kids whispered warnings. No one finished anymore. The grove became sentinel, its legend swelling. Some said a witch once lived near the well, executed and buried beneath its stones. Others claimed that long ago, the grove was a meeting place for outlaws, where they whispered confessions to the night and were never seen again. But none of those stories explained why, if you dared the grove and won, you lost your own history. Heard the story when I was 12, dared it with my friends one autumn. We laughed ourselves brave, sprinting past the crooked branches and hugging each other through fits of giggles, calling out dares of our own. We reached the well together, a group racing like ghosts, hands brushing the cold rim. The air tasted like rot and revelation. I don't remember what I saw, what I felt buried in those shadows, but I know I stumbled back, tears freezing on my cheeks, words choked in my throat. I never testified to what I lost, but I know that I came back with a hole in the place where my bravado used to be. Now, years later, I stand on the edge of Mesquite Grove again, drawn by the same darkness that stirs children's hearts. The well sits at its center, its stones slick with moss. The branches sway without a breeze. I can almost hear those low voices, humming secrets, things I never told anyone but thought I'd buried in the soft soil of memory. Something shifts in the shadows, a black shape that lingers just out of sight. My feet ache to step forward, to feel that tremor under my boots once more. But I don't. I turn away, knowing that the grove doesn't forget. It remembers my shame, my hidden scars, the names I utter only in private. And if I ever try to outrun it again, if I ever laugh through trembling lips and sprint for that ancient stone, I'll return with nothing but the memory of memory itself, an emptiness that leaves me hollow, a silence where my own history should be, and a reminder that some darkness never sleeps. They came for the light, first as curiosity, and then as something darker, something that tugged at the edges of sense and sanity. The derrick stood silent in the cool dusk, steel rafters forming a skeleton against the dying sun, and yet on. The horizon, beyond the scrub grass and dusty road, a pale green glow pulsed like a single heartbeat beneath its rigging. Nobody knew when it had started. Some said the glow had flickered on the night the last crew left, packing into dusty trucks with hollowed eyes, refusing to speak of what they'd seen. By the time word reached Midland proper, rumor had swelled into legend, and legends always draw fools, or brave men, or men who think themselves braver than they are. Jensen was the first to go, an oil-field roughneck with scars like topography on his arms. He swaggered out under the monsoon of buzzards, calling overhead, his radio crackling a careless challenge. "All right, you ghosts, light me up." Then silence. His partner, Ortiz, inched forward next morning, calling his name into the heat so thick it clung like molasses. The radio only hissed, Ortiz found Jensen's boots at the base of the derrick, pointed inward as if he'd walked right through the earth, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of a green flame humming in his ear. Ortiz left screaming, and he never fully recovered. That was 2 months ago, and now it's August, and the desert heat burns anything alive down to its bones. People stop talking about the glow in July, when evenings crunch with cicada venom, and the horizon shimmers like a mirage promising water. But come August, the glow hums back to life, a sterile promise brighter than daylight. Trucks roll in, contractors, ghost hunters, YouTube live streamers, each convinced they'll be the ones to explain it, to find the science behind the color, to lock horror in their cameras like trophies. They park their lights half a mile away. Fur coats and folding chairs lined up for a show. They never last more than one night. The derrick emits a sound under the glow, a low mechanical pulse that throbs through the ground and up their boots until they stagger, ears ringing, senses drowning. Sometimes between the pulses you can hear a voice, a faint whisper so close it feels like a breath on your neck. Stay, stay. But there is nothing human under the rig. Under the rig is emptiness sucking at your marrow, a vacuum that pulls away the bright, stubborn threads of your mind. Early reports whispered of green phosphorus seeping from pipes corroded deep in the brine, but that was before the bottles of water left on the sand turned slimy and luminescent, before the metal samples cracked open alone inside the lab freezers, before every camera battery died in unison as soon as the dawn threatened to touch the flare. They tried drones, but the birds swooped them down. They tried infrared, but the glow spilled through every spectrum, blinding the sensors. They tried priests, crosses, sage burned in burlap sacks, and still the glow pulsed on, humming each night in defiance. That's when the stories changed. At first, there were suicides, contract workers who slit their wrists and painted the rig in their blood. One morning his manager found him strung up from the derrick frame, eyes wide in a frozen grin, the glow casting his silhouette against the sand like a crouching demon. After that, people whispered of the thing inside the rig, something that walked on 4 legs but stood tall enough to peer over the catwalk, something no man could face and live. A few claimed to have seen it press its face against the mesh of the maintenance cage, glowing green eyes, too symmetrical, too empty, and a maw that smiled without lips. Most of those men were gone when search parties arrived next day, as if swallowed by the ground or the thing itself. Those who returned spoke of tunnels dug beneath the derrick, winding passages slick with oil and green slime, doors that led into darkness so complete that to shine a lamp was to invite something too hungry to resist. Then there was the humming. It started slow, a bass note laced with static, but by midnight it roared like a freight train buried alive. Hammers pounded in the pipes, spinning gears and screaming steel. Inside, the walls began to sweat, exuding a juice that crackled in the radio and dripped down your neck. The men tore at each other, eyes wild with delirium, until the scream tore open the night sky. No bodies were left to bury. And still the glow pulsed, because it must feed on fear, on madness, on the marrow of men convinced they could conquer it. The townsfolk call it the green flame of hell's backbone. They cross themselves when they pass its ridge, mutter prayers in Spanish and English to keep it at bay. Children whisper about the thing as a story to scare them into obedience. Stay away from the rig at night. Yet every month, enough men come. Mechanics come looking for oil. Engineers come looking for profit. Scientists come looking for the unknown. Paranormal thrill seekers come looking for a live stream audience. None stay past midnight. The rig does not tolerate witnesses. Last month, a reporter named Collins pitched a tent 400 yards out, a portable generator humming by his side. He'd interviewed every local sheriff and coroner until he convinced them a skeleton crew would bring good press. No sooner had he phoned in a live feed than his voice shattered. You don't understand. And then the line peeled static before cutting off. The next day, his tent lay flattened, grass charred in a perfect circle around the derrick's base. His camera lay half submerged in a shallow oil puddle. The lens cap was off, the battery drained. They dusted his prints from the frame. There were no other prints, and his footprints headed toward the dilapidated steps leading up to a sealed hatch. When they pried it open, they found no body, only a whisper rolling in the cool morning wind. Welcome. Tonight, the glow will return. The cicadas will hush, and the desert sky will stretch wide enough to snuff out every other star, leaving only the green haze beneath the rig. A new crew will arrive, brazen or foolish or desperate enough to test its appetite. They will climb the steps. They will pass through the hum into a place where no living man should dare tread. The glow will pulse in greeting and grow brighter, and they will stumble into corridors slicked with phosphorescent mold, walls weeping with salt water and something darker coiling beneath the metal grates. They will hear the voice whisper, closer. Now a breath that tastes of rust and rot. Come in. And then they will vanish, swallowed whole by the machinery of shadows that feeds each night on the marrow of those who never radio back. And when dawn breaks, the glow will fade, leaving Midland in silence once more, as if nothing has happened. As if the rig will stand patiently waiting for the next set of fools to chase the green light into the darkness. They heard it at exactly 3 minutes past noon, a scream so jagged and brittle it cleaved the sunshine in two. The swimmers at the deep end, a quartet of college kids calling themselves the Barton crew, froze mid-stroke, arms arcing through the emerald water, lips parting in silent disbelief. One of them, Annie, her dark hair plastered to her skull like wet moss, broke the silence first, clutching at her throat, her eyes wide as the limestone cavern below them. "Did you hear that?" she gasped. The others shook their heads, but their faces were pale and their bodies quivered as if perched on the verge of some ancient subterranean dread. On the deck, lifeguard Josh Tierney, the one with the sun-bleached hair and the half-burned tattoo of a marlin on his shoulder, was scanning the water, bored after 2 hours of half-empty pool and toddlers flailing in the shallow. He cocked his head, listening. Nothing but the hum of the city and the lazy lap of water against the stone. He frowned and stood, slip-sliding in his sandals toward the deep end. Above the diving board, a second lifeguard, Marisol Vega, sat with her radio jammed between her shoulder and ear, fingers tapping out a rhythm as thin and nervous as drumsticks on glass. "Something's wrong," Annie whispered, voice trembling. The water rippled between them, the bottom glowing pale through the clear current. The scream had come from below, from some fathomless hollow. Not a woman's voice, not a man's, something else, something older. Josh slipped on his rescue tube and dove in without a word. The cool of the spring well water closed around him like a lid. He passed between columns of faint green light, bubbles trailing from his ears. He counted strokes, 1, 2, 3, 4. He reached the bottom, hand brushing the smooth, algae slick limestone floor. He flipped to his back, kicked down, then up, cutting toward the surface. He broke through in a froth of white, blinking as Marisol leaned over, alarm in her dark eyes. "Find anything?" she called, voice sharp. "Nothing," he rasped. "No one down there." He pointed to the water's edge. Doritos crumbs and a smashed Gatorade lay forgotten on the stone. Then he noticed them, footprints, pale, wet impressions in the concrete, as if someone had stood there in bare feet. 6 prints, toes splayed outward. It started inches from the water and trailed away toward the bathhouse, each step heavier than the one before, as though the thing that made them had been pulled forward by some dreadful urgency. Marisol knelt beside them. Her reflection splintered in the tiny puddles around each footprint. "We need to call it in," she said, voice low. "Call the other guard." Josh shook his head, treading water. "I want to check the bottom again." He dove under once more, full cylinder of panic in his chest. He flailed toward the springs. Throat, the yawning maw where unseen currents tugged at the muscles of his limbs. He reached the edge of the cavern and slammed on the brakes, his eyes roving the shadowed recess where the underground river pulsed and whispered. He saw nothing but more darkness. No body, no reflection of his flailing form, just an ink-black void dot. When he surfaced this time, Marisol handed him her radio. "Park service," she said. "This is Vega. We need someone here now." Her voice was steady, but her knuckles were white on the plastic microphone. They waited. The swimmers huddled on the far side of the pool, wet towels draped over their shoulders, faces drawn tight. The sun shifted, warmth sliding off their skin like a tafalvita, like a sun navanai. Discarded coat. The minutes stretched, elastic and cruel. Finally, distant siren wail, growing louder, converging on Barton Springs like a pack of coyotes. 2 rangers arrived, tall men in green uniforms, one with a beard shot through with gray. They glanced at the footprints, then at the pool, then at the frantic faces around them. One ranger knelt and pressed a gloved palm into an imprint. "No good," he muttered. "Too old to lift anything." "What do you mean?" Marisol asked, too polite to mention the footprints walking away from the water. "These impressions," the ranger said, finger mapping the toes. "They're damp, but they've had time to settle. They're from earlier this morning." Josh looked up at the bridge where tourists often gathered to peer down. "But that scream, it sounded like someone drowning." "Sheer acoustics," the ranger said, standing, "echo off the spring walls. You know how sound carries around here." "But still," Marisol insisted, her gaze flicking to the bathhouse door, which stood ajar with a greasy yellow light spilling into the alley. "I saw the prints just now." The ranger shrugged. "Could be from a skinny kid walking out barefoot. Happens all the time." He glanced at his partner, who was staring into the pool, brows drawn. "Let's clear it." "No one's missing, right?" Josh hesitated. "No one's missing." The ranger nodded like the case was closed. They walked away to confer by the ranger truck. Behind them, the sun sank. Shadows thickened at the pool's edge. The tourists drifted back across the bridge, talking in low voices. Marisol glanced at Josh. "You feel it?" He didn't answer. He watched the deep end, water rippling gold and green beneath the holly fern of palms overhead. He could almost see the thing crouched below, its limbs curved, like the bones of a heron. A smell drifted up, the tang of ozone, of whetstone, of something rotting beneath the surface. Around 5, the park closed. The swimmers were ushered away, towels snagged from them before they could protest. The lifeguards gathered their gear. Fins, tubes, whistles dangling like small alarms. Marisol clicked off the radio, and the tinny hum died. The rangers shut the gate behind their truck and left, lights dancing off the water skin as they drove away. Josh and Marisol exchanged a look and unspoken question. They were alone now, the pool empty except for that endless green depth. He padded along the edge, scanning. At the far corner, where the ladder met the deck, he saw a final set of footprints. Small, narrow, arching like the prints of a doe. They led 3 feet beyond the tile edge, then stopped. No dragging, no sliding, nothing but the imprint, as if whoever had walked had simply vanished into thin air. Marisol knelt again, voice a whisper. "What was that?" Josh reached out and touched the nearest print. The concrete was warm now, though the day had cooled. He traced the curl of the toes, felt the slightest tremor under his fingertip, like the echo of a heartbeat. He closed his eyes. He heard it again, that scream, but fainter now, muffled by earth and stone. A craving cry, longing for release. He opened his eyes. "We should get out," he said. "Lock up? Forget this ever happened." Marisol shook her head, brow creasing. "I can't." He turned to her. "We'll both say we saw things. You know how they'll spin this. Local legends, they'll call it. Ghost stories to scare tourists." She didn't answer. She stared at the far wall of the spring, where a single droplet of water slipped from the lip and plopped into the pool. Beneath it, the water bulged upward, then collapsed in a perfect circle. Then another, until concentric rings widened, brushing the far wall, crisp and deliberate. They watched the ripples, hypnotized. A third droplet fell, and the ripple intersected the latter's shadow. The pool lights flickered, stuttered, and died. Absolute darkness swallowed them. In that black glass, they heard the scream again, so close it pressed against their ears, moist and urgent. Then they saw it, a shape coalescing at the bottom, pale as moonlight, limbs folding and unfolding in the current. A face pressed against. The stone, eyes too large, lips pulled back in a grin of bone. Josh stumbled backward, landing against the guard chair. Marisol's scream joined the banshees, two sharp yelps that ricocheted off the limestone. The lights flared back on for a heartbeat, just enough to catch the thing rising, water streaming from its tangled hair, its body blurred by motion, then gone before the bulb could steady. Silence returned. The pool gleamed innocently. Waves, lapping at the stone like tongue flicks. On the deck, two wet footprints glistened bare, human prints that hadn't been there before. They led from the ladder to the drink cooler and back, as though something had wandered the length of the deck, tasting the summer air. Josh found his whistle and blew. Marisol grabbed his arm, voice shaking. "We're done. Tonight we're done." He nodded, eyes on the water. "Tonight," he said, hoarse. He clipped the whistle to his mouth again, but this time he didn't blow. He listened instead for the footfalls behind him. But there was only the whisper of water, ebbing and flowing, waiting for the next scream to tear open the day. Night drapes over the Pecos like spilled ink, and the water's surface glints silver under the half-moon, as if the river itself is mocking the sky. Gerald Jerry Malai sets his small baseboat against the bank where driftwood and tangled mesquite roots rake the hull. He's been coming here for 20 years back when his old man was alive and taught him to bait hooks and hold the rod just right, yet something about tonight feels different, as though the river is holding its breath. He untangles his lines, glancing over his shoulder at the dark velvet beyond the bank where cottonwoods whisper secrets he can't quite make out. A breeze stirs, carrying the damp smell of the river and a faint echo of something else. A name. At first, he chalks it up to the wind threading through branches, but then, Jerry. The voice is low, hoarse, like wind sucking through dry reeds, and it coils around him, curling into his ear. He freezes. The bait slips from his gloved hand and plinks into the water. His heart hammers so loud he's certain anyone within 100 yards could hear it. He squeezes his eyes shut and listens. Nothing. A fish jumps one soft splash. Over there, 100 feet away, ripples undulating outward. He shakes his head, laughs, the sound brittle. Just my imagination. He bends to retrieve his bait, and doesn't dare look down the river. Hours pass in a slow slide of dark. Jerry's line tugs once, twice a light take, and he jerks it. The fight is sudden, a tug-of-war that strains his arms. He reels in a catfish so large that its whiskers brush the surface as he hauls it aboard. He pats its head affectionately, murmuring to it, then unhooks it and tosses it back. In the placating lull that follows, the river exhales, sending scents of moss and decay rising from the surface. The moon dims behind a cloud and the world goes quiet. Then he hears his name again, farther downstream. Ri. It rises, like a sigh from the water itself. He grips the gunwale, breathing slower now, trying to steady a pulse that feels like it will tear out of his chest. He peers into the shadowed curve of the river where it widens into a black mirror. The voice comes again, clearer. Jerry. The vowel stretched, dragging out like cold taffy. It feels alive. It feels hungry. He wants to call back, "Who's there?" But he knows better. In stories old fishermen's tales, when you answer the water, it answers back. It drags you under. Still, curiosity claws at him. He leans forward, whispers, "Who's calling?" And the river surges with silent promise. His own words echo on the bank. Ripples inch toward him, concentric circles that blur the reflection of the moon. Beneath the ripples, he thinks he sees shapes, limbs bending at impossible angles, bodies twisted in slow agony. He slaps the side of the boat, trying to dispel the vision. "Get a grip, Malloy," he mumbles. But the voice drifts again, closer now, and unmistakably his own father's croak. "Jerry. Help me." His throat closes. His fingers curl numb around the rod. His father died 10 years ago, swallowed by a heart attack that came like a thief in the night. He'd never spoken to Jerry again. The idea that his voice floats on the Pecos, that his soul is beckoning, it's impossible. But the voice is the same rasp of authority he remembers, gentle, sorrowful. The boat shudders as if something massive brushes against the hull. He jolts upright. He shines his headlamp across the water, the beam carving a triangle of light into the gloom. In that beam, he sees nothing but the smooth, dark water, and then, just at the edge, a finger of mist rising. It coils up, thin as cigarette smoke, and from its center emerges a hand, pale, slender, too long in the fingers. It arcs toward him with deliberate slowness. He reels the rod in tight, but his heart is stuck in his throat. The hand vanishes beneath the surface, and the mist fades. The river goes still again, as if nothing happened. Jerry's breath wrenches between his ribs. He stumbles to the bow and steadies himself, stomach churning. He reaches into his jacket and grips the handle of the small knife strapped to his hip, the one he uses to gut fish. He imagines it cutting through scales and bone. Would it work on whatever that was? He leans closer to the water, peering into the inky depths. "Dad?" he calls, voice trembling. "Is that you?" Nothing but darkness. Yet he knows the call won't go unanswered. Echoing through the trees, through the river, comes a chorus of names' voices, dozens of them, whispering, "Jerry." Jerry. Some are familiar, some foreign, some children's voices lilting like taunts. They merge into a single rising sound, the water itself humming with intention. He can't distinguish one from the other, but all of them want the same thing. He stands, legs shaky, and turns the boat toward shore. He fumbles with the trolling motor, but the cord tangles. The voices climb in urgency. He pries the cord free, heart slamming, and the motor sputters to life. The blades churn. He aims the boat for land and revs the throttle. The motor groans against the drag of water. Behind him, rolling beneath the surface, come shapes, bodies pressed against the hull, elongated forms that dance and twist. He glimpses a skeletal hand wrap around the fin for a heartbeat, then pull back into the darkness. He hears gasps, shrieks, the soft slosh of weight shifting in the water. He can't make sense of any of it. Fear burns through his mind, scorching every rational thought. He drives the boat hard toward the bank. The motor whines, protesting, but he doesn't slow. Behind him, the voices roll in a crescendo, snapping and crackling like static. "Come." back, stay, drown. They chant endless phrases that twist his brain like a corkscrew. His pulse roars in his ears. He crashes the boat into mud and leaps out. His boots sink in the soft silt. He drags the boat ashore, heart hammering. He grips the side and shoves it until the bottom comes to rest on dry ground. Everything is silent then, no whisper, no mist, no shapes. The river sways under moonlight, indifferent. Jerry clutches the blade at his side. He looks at the empty water and wonders if it was all in his mind. But when he turns back to the riverbank, he sees footprints impressed in the mud leading from the water, prints too small for any adult, each one followed by another, trailing off into the dark where the trees crowd so tight he can't see the end. He swallows against a dry throat. His breath hitches as he drops to his knees and traces. A child's footprint with his fingertip. The soil clings to his glove, cold. He looks up at the river and hears his name again, quieter this time, almost tender. Jerry, it sighs, and there's a promise in the way it coils around the word, like the hush of silk sliding over skin. Backs away, trembling, and stands. The blade is heavy in his hand. He takes a deep breath and looks once more at the footprints. They end at the edge of the tree line. He hears the trees sigh. He remembers his father's stern lectures about curiosity, how a man ought to know when to walk away. He turns and walks fast, ignoring the damp underbrush grabbing at his legs. Behind him, the river's surface gleams once more in the moonlight, utterly quiet. But as he reaches the gravel road that leads up to his truck, he knows the voices won't let him leave. They'll follow him, gnaw at him in dreams, slip beneath the surface of his mind and tug him back. The river is patient. It will wait for him to return, his name on its tongue, its promise curling in the dark, invincible and eternal. They say you can hear it coming before you see it, a low rumble that creeps across the desert floor like a distant heartbeat, pulsing through the cracked pavement and rattling the window panes of empty houses. It always arrives at 2:17 a.m. dead. On the minute, slicing the silence with the weight of 1,000 freight cars. Out here, outside El Paso, there's no signal to warn you, no crossing arms or bells. One moment the night is still, the next it's filled with motion, a dark blur. On rusted rails, churned sand, and a train that carries something inhuman. I first heard it the night my neighbor vanished. I was on my porch, smoking a cigarette, watching the horizon where faint lights marked the distant city. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a thunder rolled through the hills behind my trailer, and the ground vibrated beneath my boots. I stepped off the porch, peering into the black. No lights, nothing but the glint of the tracks under the moon. Then the air went cold, a blast of wind that knocked the cigarette from my fingers. In the emptiness came the whistle, hollow and keening, as if a pale throat were screaming deep inside a tomb. I pressed my back against the door, heart pounding, convinced I was going to die of exposure before death came any other way. I never saw the train itself, only caught glimpses at the periphery, metal wheels spinning without steam, motionless. Cars that still convulsed against inertia. But the caboose was different. It crawled into view last like a living thing, and I saw riders clinging to its platform. They were gaunt specters, bodies stretched tight across bones, skin the color of dust. Their arms wrapped around the caboose rail as though it were a lifeline. No motion from them except their heads, tilted to one side, staring ahead with empty eye sockets that seemed to drink in the night. They made no sound, but I heard something. A soft, wet slosh at their jaws, like tissue moving against bone. Then the train thundered past, the night trembling, and in the echo I heard a voice whisper my name. The next morning, my neighbor's truck was parked outside her house, engine still warm. The front door hung open. Inside, nothing was amiss until you reached her bedroom. The mattress lay bloodied, torn open as if something inside had clawed its way out. No body, no trace. Just a smear of red droplets leading from the bed out into the yard, where they vanished at the end of the tracks. Everyone said she must have run off, but those of us who heard the 2:17 a.m. whistle knew better. Some things aren't human, and they don't let go. I decided to find out where the train came from, convinced that if I could unmask its origin, I could stop it. I packed water, a flashlight, and my father's old hunting knife, and I slung my pack over my shoulder one moonless night. I walked out to the rails, every step sinking into loose gravel that crunched underfoot. The desert was wide and empty, but about half a mile ahead I saw a faint glow, the first sign of the phantom train's approach. I crouched low beside a telegraph pole, listening as the rumble grew into a roar. My flashlight beam swung in a lazy arc, catching nothing until the light flickered across the side of the train. It stalled me cold. The cars were not steel, but something worse, carved bone, fused in long sheets, each link marked with runes scratched deep and blackened by rust. Or maybe blood. My breath caught in my throat when I saw movement inside one of the cars. A hand pressed against the slatted bone wall, fingers long and tapered, ending in cracked nails. The train slowed to a crawl, and on the caboose platform those emaciated figures pressed closer, so many that they filled the whole railing. One turned its head, its jaw moving in a wet, rattling rhythm like it was chewing on the air. Its empty sockets locked onto mine. I fumbled for my knife, fingers slick with sweat, but the knife dropped from my hand when I heard the whisper. It was my voice. Not my voice, but a perfect mirror of it calling, "Come, ride with us." They ridiculed the desert around me, the safety of my trailer, the memory of warm blankets. They promised relief from pain, from hunger, from the ache of emptiness. Their mouths moved, but the words inside me shook free, and I realized they were speaking into my mind, planting the seed that I was alone in the dark, that only they understood what true darkness was. I ran. Gravel spat at my heels, the trains, wheels clacking behind me like the ticking of a great clock counting down to the end of the world. I stumbled, skidding to my knees, and when I looked back the train was gone, swallowed by the night, leaving only fading echoes and a single track of disturbed sand. Since then, I've tried to live as though nothing happened, but it follows you. Something waits by the edge of sleep, whispering at the back of your mind in that indiscernible voice. I can no longer tell my own thoughts from theirs. Last night, at 2:17 a.m., I woke to the whistle again, and I felt the floor shake beneath my mattress. I thought I saw those hollow-eyed figures reflected in my window, their bodies pressed tight to the glass. I wanted to scream, but my throat was gone. I only heard the train roar past my room, rattling the walls, and felt the faint drip of something, cold rolling down my neck. When I finally forced my eyes open, I found footprints in my hallway, dark, glistening prints leading to my bedroom door, and nothing after that. This morning, I packed a bag. I'm heading west, chasing that ghost train, believing I can end it. At 2:17 a.m., I'll stand by the tracks again and confront those creatures on the caboose, those hollow men who hunger for souls. But sometimes I wonder if I'm already aboard, if those wet footprints across my floor were their way of claiming me. And if I see them staring at me through the night, I'll walk forward anyway, because once you've heard the phantom whistle, you know it's pointless to stay behind. Train will come for you, no matter how far you run. They drove in under the low summer moon, Rangers Jessa Landon and Miguel Torres, tires crunching gravel as they eased onto the narrow service road. The Camal River lay silent in the dark beyond the pines, its water black as spilled ink. Jessa's Headlight beams swept across the clearing before her. Tents flattened into ash, poles melted into skeletal husks, a single charred kettle hanging from a twisted tripod. The odor of burned flesh and resin rolled off the forest floor in suffocating waves. Miguel swallowed hard. "It's like they vaporized," he murmured, voice tight. Jessa knelt at the edge of the fire ring, ash puffing from her boot. The stones that had once held back the flames were cracked and fused, black glass where magma must have pooled. Around the ring, letters scorched into the dirt glowed in the headlamp's glare. "We'll find you next." The words repeated over and over, each letter deep as a grave. In the spaces between, footprints bare, human led away into the black woods, then vanished at the tree line where no underbrush grew. They called it in, every detail. No bodies, no survivors, no gear beyond the smoking debris. Jessa checked her watch, midnight. 2 weeks ago, the area had been packed with weekend campers, laughter drifting across the river. Now the hush felt heavier than any storm-dark sky. Miguel held up his hand, sharp clicking from a branch snapped somewhere ahead. They advanced, flashlights probing the trees. The pines loomed tall and silent, their needles dripping sticky sap that caught the light like crimson tears. Jessa's radio buzzed with static, then died. Miguel tapped his earpiece. Nothing. She looked at him, heart thrumming. "Cut wires or just not cut us off?" He shook his head, voice low. "Probably both." They moved in tandem, boots sinking into dead pine needles. Somewhere beneath their feet, a faint heat pulsed, but the air remained still and cool. Jessa noticed the forest floor shifting, almost breathing, as if the land itself inhaled. The footprints they'd seen at the camp returned here. Pressed into damp earth, they followed a looping path, leading them in circles. Each time they reeled back to the same spot, a stump carved with the same message. "We'll find you next," only written deeper, letters ragged and smoldering. Miguel crouched, hand quivering as he traced a charred finger across the stump. "It's like the tree did this," he said. Jessa's breath caught. The bark around the carving was undisturbed, but glowing veins pulsed beneath its surface like living embers. She shone her light higher. Above them, the canopy throbbed with movement, branches swaying though no wind stirred. Whispers drifted down, an unreadable susurrus, voices tangled in the hiss of pine resin. Jessa flicked off her flashlight and everything went black but the red glow beneath her feet. When she shut her eyes, the whispers sounded distinctly like her name, soft and coaxing. Something brushed her shoulder. She spun, yanked her hand to her sidearm, nothing but empty air. The silence returned, then a single snap, closer than before. Miguel grabbed her arm. "We shouldn't be here." Jessa swallowed and nodded toward the footprints. They followed again, this time moving downhill toward the riverbank. The Camal's high waters shone silver under the moon, but the shoreline was littered with overturned chairs, backpacks, and Jessa swallowed a child's doll, head missing, mouth gaping. The riverbank smelled of sulfur and wet ash. A shape flickered across the water. Someone standing waist deep, staring back. Jessa raised her light. For a moment, the figure held a lantern, flame sputtering. Then the lantern went out, and the shape melted into the dark current. Instantly, the river roared, swelling as if the current itself had vaporized. Jessa staggered back, tripping over a length of rope, the whistle of the water in her ears. Miguel grabbed her, yanking her up. He jabbed a flashlight across the river. Waves rippled toward them, churning like a living beast. Jessa caught sight of something in the water, bulging, deathly pale eyes staring from below the surface. Then the lantern glow flickered again, this time behind them. They spun, flashlights colliding, and saw the charred messages carved into the trunks of 2 pines framing the river. "We're here," they read. Jessa's heart pounded. She aimed her light up into the trees. Eyes gleamed from the branches, dozens of them, reflecting the beam. Gray squirrels? No, too large, too desperate. Faces, not creatures. Distorted, ashen faces pressed against bark, mouths opening and closing in silent screams. The pines groaned, their limbs twisting downward like arms reaching for prey. Miguel fired a warning shot into the air. The recoil rattled his jaw. The faces disappeared in a swirl of falling needles and ash. The woods fell silent once more. Jessa grabbed his shoulder. "Run!" she panted. They turned inland, crashing through thick ferns and brambles. Behind them, the forest seemed to pulse with an angry heartbeat. Branches arced overhead, dripping sap that hissed on their skin. Every step they took, the earth glowed faintly, the charred messages following them, carved on roots and stones. "Can't hide." They broke through the trees into a clearing ringed by megalithic boulders. A makeshift altar lay in the center. Melted canteens, burnt paper, an empty lantern, and at its heart, a single charred sign reading, "Your turn." The moment they crossed the threshold, the ground shivered. A low moan rolled across the stones, as if the hills themselves mourned. Miguel dropped to one knee, hand to the dirt. "They were here," he said, "all of them." Jessa looked down at the soil beneath her fingers. It was slick with tar-like ooze, breathing in irregular pulses. "What do you think happened?" he swallowed, voice hollow. "Whatever it was, it's still here." The altar's lantern shuddered and burst into flame, though it had no wick. Orange glow bathed their faces, and in that light, Jessa saw them. Ghosts emerging from the trees, charred and agonized, eyes empty pits. They drifted forward in a silent march, arms outstretched. Jessa rose, backing away, but the ground shifted beneath her boots, soaking them in a hot, sticky mud. Behind her, Miguel fumbled for his radio static crackled, then the distant voice of their dispatcher. "Rangers, you still there?" Jessa forced a whisper. "Get us help." The ghosts halted at the clearing's edge. The lead wraith raised a hand, finger pointed at Jessa. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and a wave of heat slammed into her chest. She staggered, struggled for breath. Miguel fired again, but the bullets passed through the specter as if it were mist. He grabbed Jessa's arm. "I'm dragging you out," he said. He hauled her backward, the forest fighting them every step. Roots writhed to entangle their legs, brambles lashed at their faces. The wraiths drifted forward, flames flickering behind their hollow eyes, whispering Jessa's name. The altar lantern hissed, sputtered, and exploded in a pulse of blinding light. When her vision cleared, they were at the tree line, horizon open to the service road. The ghosts faded into the pines, their mournful wails swallowed by the wind. Jessa collapsed onto the gravel, chest heaving. Miguel knelt beside her, unholstering a medkit. Far down the road, headlights appeared, rescue trucks, the beam slicing the trees. Jessa looked back. The clearing lay empty, no altar, no stones, only moonlit grass. But at the edge of the road, charred letters gleamed on the asphalt. Soon. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Not if we find them first." The black ribbon of Highway 6 stretched ahead like a slick promise under a knife-sharp moon. The asphalt still warm from the day's sun even at 2 in the morning. Dust devils spun in the shoulders, little whirls of desolation that whispered. Secrets in the radiance of passing headlights. Sarah's knuckles bled white on the leather wheel, her knuckles burning with the tension of every mile they'd covered since Dallas. Beside her, Marcus leaned forward, eyes squeezing the dark for some sign, anything. That would explain the solitary figure crouched in the road ahead at the crest of that last hill. Their rental car's engine thrummed. Beneath them, German import. Too much torque. too little warning for the stranger's silent posture. He stood motionless, back straight, hat brim low over the curve of his cheek. Boots planted wide as though he was carved from the same obsidian as the pavement. His coat, frayed and whip 13 at the cuffs, puffed in the southerly breeze. Something about the way he held himself half-turned, as if deciding whether to step into their lane or simply watch made Sarah's breath stutter. "It's a hitchhiker?" she said, voice too small in the cavern of the car. "Shouldn't be out here," Marcus answered, voice hollow. "Texas highway, yeah, but not this far from any exit, not at this hour." He clicked the radio static, then dead. Silence. The compass needle on the dashboard wavered, twitched, then locked northward despite their southbound route. Sarah eased her foot from the accelerator. Marcus met her eyes, eyebrows arched. In the dim sheen of the dash, his face looked gaunt, hollow-eyed with something closer to dread than irritation. "What?" he began, but the highwayman lifted a hand. Slow, deliberate, palm outstretched, fingers uncurled like a bent scythe. A gesture of peace or command. Sarah couldn't tell. Marcus sighed, shifting gears, easing the speed below 50. Their beam picked up the stranger's silhouette, ragged and impossibly tall. The wind carried the faintest clink like a spurs jangle, though there were no spurs, no horses, just that endless ribbon of sun-warmed black. Sarah prayed he would step aside. She imagined pulling off, calling police, some half-awake patrolmen, shrugging it off, sending them on their way by dawn. Instead, the figure held his ground. "Let's slow," she said, voice trembling. Well, before she could finish, headlights flared behind them. Another car, low to the ground, stole forward in their lane, too close for comfort. In a heartbeat, Marcus jerked the wheel. The rental fishtailed, tires squealing as they clipped the shoulder. The highwayman remained perched at the center. Watching, unfazed. Sarah pressed her palms to her mouth. The compass spun madly. The dashboard flickered. The GPS blinked. Navigatation unavailable. Outside, the wind roared. The trees lining the highway shivered with rectangular faces painted by the moonlight. In that split second, Marcus wrestled the wheel back to center. The car lurched off the shoulder, dug its tires into gravel, and sank into a rut. Air whined. Rubber protested, and then nothing. Silence heavy as wet clay. The engine idled, but they rolled backward, then forward, caught in the rut. Unable to steer. Sarah clicked the hazard lights, watching the figure thin in the distance as the other car, the one they'd almost collided with, sped past. Headlights. Blinding. No horn, no brake lights, just the hungry rush of wind. When the dust settled, the highwayman was gone. Only the faintest imprint remained. 2 sets of boot tread. Deep in the asphalt, oriented northward. Marcus cleared his throat. That was, his words entangled in his throat. Sarah stared at the tire tracks, at the knot of tension between them, at the mile markers ticking by as their stationary car seemed to drift anyway, ever southbound. "We can't stop," Marcus said, slamming his palm on the dash. The car lurched to life, the GPS flickered, then led them on south to Austin. Sarah jerked the steering wheel. It yawned, reluctant, then turned. They hurtled forward. The thought of stopping out there in the rut felt like surrender. Any attempt to turn around crashed against some invisible wall. The highwayman might be waiting again at the next ridge. They crested another hill. The tracks, faded and compressed, pointed northerly into the moonlit horizon. Sarah tried the radio again. Nothing but static. No AM, FM, satellite, just layer upon layer of vacant hiss. Light clusters twinkled in the far distance. Austin's outline, the promise of street lamps and open diners. But up ahead, The highway remained unforgiving, a velvet tunnel that seemed to swallow the car whole. She swallowed. Voice husky. Marcus, if we keep going, if we get to Austin, he shook his head. I don't know what I'll do, Sarah. Stop by the Capitol? Ring 911? They'll find nothing. They'll tell us we imagined him. His words spun between them as the world flickered. Windshield wipers oscillated though the air was bone dry. Gauges pulsed red though the car was cleaner than dawn. Sarah looked down and saw the odometer count backward. Her pulse followed. Soot. A distant rumble rattled the frame. Headlights appeared, not behind them, but ahead, in defiance of any logic. They drew closer. She pressed her palm to the passenger window. The driver's face was obscured, but the passenger door swung open as they passed. A shape stepped out blurrily, impossibly raised an arm, pointed at them. Sarah heard a whisper on the wind. He's coming. No time to think. The car clipped the center line, jolting violently. The passenger side window shattered inward. Shards rained onto Marcus's lap. He yelped, swerving again. The car fishtailed, tires screeched, and then it drifted, inexorable, back onto the highway. On the shoulder, a figure crouched low, boots dug in. The brim of a hat caught the moonlight. The HIGHWA and Sarah shrieked. Marcus shuttered his eyes, pressed hard on the brake. The engine stalled. For a heartbeat, they rolled toward the stranger's silhouette. Shadow collided with a faint halo of torchlight, something flickering in his hand, and in that second before impact, Sarah caught sight of the highwayman's face. Pale as ash, the eyes empty wells, lips peeled back over teeth pointed and black. No flesh, only the hollow suggestion of where flesh might have clung. Then, cars screeched behind them. Blue and red beams carved the night. A patrol cruiser slid to a stop 10 yards behind. Two officers stumbled out, flashlights slicing them. Dark guns drawn. The highwaymen lifted a gaunt hand in farewell, and their beams washed over nothing but asphalt. No body, no footprints. Nothing but the indentations that bent unnaturally northward. Marcus and Sarah sat, heaving, as floodlights ignited the highway. Purple-haired rookie radioed frantically. The highwayman never emerged. After 10 minutes, 15, nothing stirred. Finally, one officer leaned in, voice clipped. "Miss, sir, you need to keep moving. No sign of anyone out here. You're welcome to come down to the station if you're willing, but you're free to go." The rookie flicked his light onto Sarah's face. "Ma'am, you okay?" She stared down the road. The beam sliced at that endless asphalt ribbon, targeting nothing. When she spoke, her voice quavered like a beaten thing. "He followed us the whole way. Southbound to Austin and then north." The rookie paled, jotted notes. The senior officer tugged his partner aside. Sarah watched their mouths move without hearing. The highwaymen's boot prints, pressed into the tar, pointed north. Every marker they passed along Highway 6 lay behind them now as they pulled away from the cruiser. No paramedic, no tow truck, just the silent escort of blue lights fading into their rearview. Marcus drove. The compass on the dash hovered at north despite their southbound push. Sarah stared until the shackles of fear claimed her throat. The highwayman was out there, rootless, roaming the black Texas ribbon, waiting for the next pair of headlights. To slice through the dark, to swerve, to vanish, to return by themselves, autopiloted to the city slump of Austin, where hospitality waited and disbelief reigned. They drove on, the night folding behind them. But Sarah knew that somewhere a ragged coat billowed in the breeze, that two hollow eyes watched the road's curvature, and that every tourist, every driver, would carry that same pained heartbeat of memory of a man who should not have lived. At midnight on Highway 6, of cars that returned without their drivers, and of boot prints that refused to point the way back home. The wind off the prairie carried the faint crackle of fireworks as dusk settled over the old Walker place, an abandoned cattle ranch stretching like a dying heart across the Texas plains. Dust curled in lazy spirals around the sagging fence posts, and the skeletal remains of the barn stood sentinel against the deepening indigo sky. Crickets chirped in the mesquite thickets beyond, and somewhere out in the fields a lone jackrabbit rustled through the tumbleweeds. It was July 4th, a night of celebration. But for Lee Harmon and his cousin Maggie, who'd come out here to save money on fireworks and drink beer in secret, it felt like trespassing in a land that remembered them. Lee popped the cap off a long neck, the suds fizzing white as he lifted it to his lips. He had always loved Independence Day, the bright blasts of red and blue, the smell of gunpowder, the taste of freedom on his tongue. Yet tonight, as he watched Maggie light a sparkler beneath the crooked oak by the dry well, the sky seemed too quiet at first, as though the world was holding its breath. A firework arced overhead, a comet of light trailing smoke then erupted. In a thunderous bloom, and they cheered, pounding each other on the shoulder. But seconds later, a single rifle shot cracked across the darkness, sharp as a whip, followed by a woman's scream that seemed to rise from the very ground, chilling and bone-thin. Lee froze mid-grin. Maggie's sparkler fizzled and she dropped it. Their beer bottles slammed against the wooden slats of the porch floor. They exchanged a glance, wide-eyed in the glow of the dying sparks. It wasn't the celebration. It was something older and colder. "Nice try," Lee said, forcing a laugh. "Who's out shooting somewhere else?" Maggie shook her head, her curls bouncing. "That sounded close, Lee. Too close." But Lee could feel it in his bones, the sudden cold that slid down his spine. The wind had dropped, the night held still, as if listening. The distant boom of fireworks resumed, but muffled, as if happening through some thick wall. Then another rifle crack, and then another scream so real and ragged that Maggie's hand flew to her mouth. It wasn't a party trick. It wasn't a prank. It was a voice and a weapon from 100 years ago echoing across time. They stumbled off the porch and into the yard, heads swiveling. The fields beyond lay dark in the sagebrush, but faint lantern light flickered like will-o'-the-wisps out there, moving in and out of the mesquite. Lee squinted. Their silhouettes, men in brimmed hats, rifles raised. They wore long coats, dusty and faded. Their posture was rigid, eyes pinned forward. Their mouths opened in silent shouts. As Lee blinked, one figure dropped to a knee, fired a line of shots. The crack echoed across the prairie. A dozen more voices screamed, phantom bullets splintering the air where peacefully grazing cattle had been just moments before. Maggie grabbed Lee's arm, shaking. "We've got to go, now." He started backward, heart pounding, but stopped himself. No, wait. This isn't real." A lantern-lighted man at the edge of the tree line turned, faced them. Lee's throat constricted when he saw the eyes, sunken black hollows burning with grief and fury. A long coat hung off his shoulders, frayed and stained. He lifted his rifle and fired straight at them. Lee fell, staggering under the force of the intangible blast. He hit the dirt, gravel digging into his palms, and saw Maggie's face bleeding from where she'd stumbled in her retreat. But she rose again, eyes wild. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears glinting in the lantern.
"Low."
But her lips moved, shaping words Lee could almost grasp. The mournful litany of the dead. He crawled toward her, breath ripping in ragged gasps as the ghostly land roared back to life. Horse hooves thundered in the distance, and he turned to see spectral mounts barreling across the prairie riders in torn uniforms, their sabers glinting, faces contorted with terror. They raced past the barn, clipping the sagging doors, sending it crashing inward. Dust and rotted wood planks rained down. Another scream rent the air, female this time, pleading. Mercy, mercy. Lee felt it then, the tug at his mind, as though the ranch itself wanted him to witness what had happened here. The Walker place had once been a refuge during the last days of the Revolution until Confederate deserters, drunk on ideology and brandy, had slaughtered the Walker family and their hands in a hail of bullets and steel. The deed was buried in dusty archives but never cleansed from the earth. Lightning flashed across the fields, though there was no storm. In the brief illumination, Lee saw bodies strewn around the well. Men, women, children, their eyes wide in shock. Some held torches. Some clutched rifles too late to defend their homestead. The lantern men reloaded, cursed in ancient drawls that scraped across Lee's ears like fingernails on a chalkboard. The earth beneath him tremored, and a deafening roar rose from the well, as if the ghosts of the slaughtered were clawing their way free. Maggie crumpled beside him, whispering, "Lee, I see them. The bones. They're climbing out." He looked. Down. Gray, mottled hands, bony and claw-like, poked through the cracked stones of the well's rim. They reached for him, fingers jerking, nails cracking as they scraped the mortar. The hands grasped his boots, pulling him toward that yawning black hole. He tried to pull back, but his legs wouldn't obey. And then the screams, hundreds, rising. In a terrible chorus became one sound, a monstrous keening that rattled his skull. Lee shouted, and at that moment the fireworks display reached its climax. A series of massive shells detonated overhead, blooming like giant chrysanthemums, crackling. Down in showers of color. The brilliant lights shone directly on the spectral tableau below. The ghostly rifleman froze in place, lantern light extinguished. The horseman reared, then vanished into flickers of smoke. The hands at the well receded. For a heartbeat, the world was normal. Two cousins lying in the grass, the barn ruins quiet, the night alive with celebratory booms. Then the dream dissolved. Lee sat up, drenched in sweat, chest heaving. Maggie lay beside him, eyes closed, breathing shallow. He shook her shoulder. "Maggie, hey Maggie." She stirred, blinking at the bright arcs of light above. "Fireworks," she said, voice trembling. "They're wonderful." He helped her to her feet. In the aftermath, the ranch looked forsaken, silent but for the distant pops. No lanterns, no uniforms, no rifle cracks. Only the smoke wafting from half-spent sparklers and the ghosts of what had been. They stumbled to the pickup parked by the fence. Lee's hand shook as he fumbled for the keys. Maggie's eyes were wet, scanning the empty fields as if searching. He started the engine, an old roar, and they tore out onto the dusty road, leaving the Walker place behind, its dark silhouette receding into the night. Still, in his rearview mirror, Lee thought he saw a lantern light bobbing just inside the tree line. A figure in a dusty coat stood watching them go, rifle relaxed at his side. His hollow eyes flashed once in the glare of the fireworks, and then he vanished, like smoke curling into the stars. On the radio, a crackling voice announced the finale. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, the grand finale of your July 4th fireworks spectacular." The roar of the last shells sent tremors through the truck bed. Lee turned to look at Maggie. She stared out the windshield, face pale, whispering, "They're still here." He didn't argue, because he knew the ghosts did not belong to midnight or to fireworks. They belonged to that land, to the earth, and they would hunt it forever. Riffs of rifles and screaming caught into the heart of any who dared to light a fuse on their sacred soil. The dusk settled over Llano like a shroud, the dusty air growing heavy with the heat that refused to die, and somewhere in the half-light, the first echo of metal against wood sounded soft and distant. Emily Parker had returned to her hometown. For the first time in 10 years, drawn back by her grandmother's sudden disappearance and the whispered stories that no one in Llano wanted to admit aloud. She parked on the edge of Main Street, where the skeletal remains of storefronts leaned into the road, their windows dark, and wondered if she'd made a mistake. The sun dipped beneath the granite bluffs, and suddenly the vacant street seemed to inhale, as though bracing itself for something long overdue. She was turning away when a glow bloomed at the far end of the block, tiny at first, then growing, as though someone had struck a match and held it aloft. An oil lantern, its flame steady and golden, bobbed into view. No footfalls accompanied it. Emily watched frozen as the bearer emerged, a silhouette in a long, tattered duster that swayed around thin legs, the collar turned up against the wind that wasn't there. They moved with careful deliberation, each step silent, but the lantern's light carved a path across the empty pavement and flickered against the peeling paint of old hotel doors. Emily should have run. Instead, she found herself stepping onto the street, drawn forward by a force she could neither name nor resist. She told herself it was curiosity or the need for answers. The lantern-bearer paused, the flame winking like a dying eye, and Emily felt the first tremor of fear curl through her spine. When the figure raised the lantern, its beam found her, and she swore the air shifted, growing colder, heavier. "You shouldn't be here," a voice rasped, low as wind through dry grass. It could have been the bearers or the lantern itself. Speaking, Emily could not tell. "I'm looking for my grandmother," she said, her voice small. "Have you seen her?" The bearer didn't lower the lantern. Instead, it tilted, and Emily saw hazy in the golden glow the gaunt line of a face, skin stretched tight across high cheekbones, eyes hollowed to empty pits where the light seemed to flicker like trapped embers. Its lips parted, then closed, a motion too deliberate to be natural. "You will find her," it whispered, "but not as you wish." Emily stumbled backward. The lantern's glow strobed across her panic-stricken face, then nothing. She spun around, heart hammering, but there was no lantern, no figure, just the long, unbroken street, pocketed in darkness. That night, Emily slept little. She dreamed of empty faces, mouths pulled open in silent screams, and the awful stillness of eyes gouged away. When morning came, she found a neighbor's boy wandering near the riverbank, pale, shaking, eyes unfocused. "I saw it," he muttered. "The lantern man, he asked my name." Emily knelt beside him, noticing the thin scars raw, angry around his sockets. He couldn't speak again. She went to the sheriff's house, the wood sagging, paint blistered. Inside, Sheriff Marcus Tanner sat behind his desk. Unopened letters spread before him. His eyes were bloodshot, haunted. "They're back," he said before she could speak. "First Miss Pierce last week. Eyes burned out, mouth frozen. Then, Old Man Harris, body found by the tracks, hollowed out. And tonight, my deputy." He ran a hand through graying hair. "There's a pattern." "Pattern?" Emily pressed. "The lantern bearer," he answered, voice dropping to a whisper. "Folks thought it was just legend. A story parents told their kids to keep them off the streets after dark. But it's real, and it's hungry." Over the next days, the town convulsed with terror. Windows were boarded, locks changed, children kept inside. Every dusk, someone claimed to glimpse a lone lantern bobbing between buildings, moving through back alleys, pausing at broken windows. No one dared follow, no one ever returned the next morning. Emily tracked the disappearances. Mrs. Delgado, the teacher, vanished from her kitchen. Amos Clark, the mechanic, found at dawn, mutilated beyond recognition. And always the lanterns. Glow, observed by trembling neighbors who hid behind curtains. Emily refused to hide. She had to know why. Research in her grandmother's attic uncovered a brittle scrapbook of newspaper clippings. In 1924, A man named Silas McBride set fire to the Murchison Hotel, killing dozens. Some said he was a failed lantern maker whose love was spurned by the heiress who ran the hotel. He went mad, swearing vengeance against the town that had cast him aside. He disappeared in the flames, but a child survivor claimed she saw him carry a lantern through the smoke, hunting them down one by one. After that, strange deaths were occasionally recorded, people found with eyes burned away, mouths agape, and always a lantern sighting in the charred hotel ruins. Emily's grandmother, it seemed, had been researching the same tale. Her notes hinted at a ritual, something about a line of descent, a blood bond that tied the bearer to his quarry, growing stronger as the years passed. Emily stared at an old photograph. Her grandmother, 15, holding the same oil lantern, its glass cracked. Emily's heart lurched as she realized if the legend was true. Her grandmother might have become the next target, or worse, a vessel to sustain the bearer's curse. That night, Emily crept through the darkness toward the Murchison ruins, clutching the lantern she had taken from her grandmother's attic. The town slept fitfully. Dogs barked in yards, coyotes howled beyond the riverbanks. She stepped across fallen bricks and charred beams, wind swirling through the hollow shell of the hotel, stirring ash. She lit the attic lantern with trembling hands and whispered the incantation scrawled in her grandmother's careful script, a plea for mercy, a binding oath, a call to any power that might listen. The shadow came first as a chill. Then the lantern flickered, sputtered, and died, plunging her into darkness. Emily's breath fogged in the cold, and through the blackness she heard footsteps soft, deliberate, echoing against burned walls. She tried to relight her lantern, but the wick was drenched, the oil spilt. The footsteps stopped close behind her. "Emily Parker," the bearer's voice rasped, "you carry my light." She spun, heart thundering, and raised the dark lantern. For a moment, no flame, but then a glow flared inside the basin, searing her eyes, and the bearer stepped into view, face inches from her own. Its mouth cracked in a silent scream, and Emily felt a searing heat in her skull, as though the lantern's flame had driven into her mind. She screamed, shoving backward until she kicked a fallen beam. The shock knocked her free. She scrambled away, pulling the lantern over her head and hurling it toward the bearer. The glass shattered, oil igniting in a sudden flare that dumped brilliant light onto the bearer's face. It recoiled, shrieking impossible, inhuman, and Emily fled into the night. Back along the broken streets. Dawn broke as she reached the edge of town, stumbling through fields, her clothes singed, her vision blurred. Behind her, the town of Llano lay silent, its buildings scarred, its people hiding. In her hand, she still held a fragment of the cracked lantern glass, warm and pulsing like a heart. She knew the bearer was defeated, at least for now, but the lantern's light lived on in her blood, a burning ember that would not be quenched, and she knew, deep down, that the lantern bearer would return. Because every flame, even one born of vengeance and madness, requires fuel, and she had carried it into the night. The townspeople would soon awaken to streetlights glowing where none had stood, and once more, by morning, someone would be found eyes burned out, mouth frozen. In a silent scream, and Emily Parker would be waiting, lantern in hand, to face what she had unleashed. The wind rose as the moon slipped behind ragged pinnacles of rock, casting the desert in a bruised, otherworldly light. Under the blood moon, Big Bend's canyons looked less like earthen corridors and more like the gaping maw of some ancient, slumbering leviathan. Kalina's boots crunched on shale as she led the small group deeper into the shadowed gorge, her headlamp's beam wavering in the sudden draft that breathed between the canyon walls. The app on her wrist glowed red, 217, A.M. Perfect time to witness the umbral display she'd come searching for. Her friends laughed, voices brittle from altitude and nerves. The desert was alive with cicadas, their chorus a frantic buzzing pulse that seemed to chant a warning. Troy, tall and wolfish in his excitement, paused to shine his light at a ring of stones set into a shallow alcove rocks that looked stained a deep, rusty color. Rust-red tears, he joked, the desert's own blood moon souvenir. Kalina tried to laugh it off, but the stones did look wet, as though someone had wept against the canyon's cold shoulder. They moved on, past bleached bones of scrub brush and rattlesnake skins snapped empty of their owners. The moon broke free overhead, a horrible, leprous light spilling purple over the sandstone. Kalina's heart hammered. She'd read reports of hikers glimpsing ring-shaped shadows, a carousel of shifting, dark silhouettes that followed at the edge of vision, that slithered across desert expanses, that stared from the rock faces as though they were witnesses to some grief-stricken ritual. As they rounded a bend, the laughter died. There, etched into the cliff face, was a perfect circle of lightless black, rimmed by the moon's scarlet glow. The rock around it dripped a thick iron scent. Kalina's skin prickled. When she dared to lean in, her breath caught. The surface wasn't rock at all, but something softer, like skin wood-grained, mottled, alive. She felt her pulse in her throat. Behind her, Troy snapped a photo, the camera's flash igniting the tableau in harsh white. For an instant, the ring seemed solid. Then it sank back as though the cliff had exhaled and the cavernous void yawned once more. A low creek drifted across the gap. She stiffened. The canyon walls trembled. "We should get out," she whispered, voice raw. But her words were drowned by the sound of footsteps, soft, scraping echoes that circled the campers. 3 sets of boots, despite the emptiness of the space. They spun, lights converging on the mouth of the alcove, but nothing emerged. And then the shadows began to stir. At first, it was a faint flicker, a dark smear against the rock. Then the ellipse split into 3 distinct shapes, tall, spindly silhouettes that leaned forward as though thirsting for life. The shadows moved closer, stretching until they filled the canyon floor. Kalina's breath froze. The shapes wept. Thin rivulets of rust-red dripped from their eye sockets, or from where eye sockets should have been, and splashed in puddles at their feet. The moonlight glinted on the tears, each drop a burning ember of color that lunged downward before vanishing into the sand. "Run," she rasped, but her voice died. The shadows darted, not toward the group, but past them, sliding along the canyon walls in precise, mocking imitation of human gait. They weren't stalking the hikers. They were stalking the canyon itself, painting every surface with their mournful tears. Troy fumbled his backpack. "I've got—" A screech split the night. It was neither animal nor human, but something assembled from bone and sorrow. The sound echoed, tossed crazily between the rocks until it cracked like thunder. Kalina's world shrank to a tight point around her lungs. She lunged, knocking Troy's elbow, sending his camera skittering into the dust. He cried out as he chased it, but Kalina yanked him away toward the narrow path they'd come in on. Behind them, the shadows twisted out of the ring, funneling into a single line like blood flowing down stone. They moved fast now, edges blurred, pouring through cracks and crevices, at once liquid and solid. With every step, the canyon seemed to tilt as though swallowing itself. Kalina's friends were stumbling, caught in the riptide of fear. She grabbed both by the shoulders, shouting, "Keep moving! Don't look back!" The shadows followed, racing them through the canyon's throat. With each exhalation, the desert seemed to lean in, pressing against their backs, urging them to run faster. And then the moonlight shifted clouds, or perhaps the canyon's own breath blotting out the blood-red orb. The shadow line thinned, hesitated in that fragment of time. Kalena recalled the old legend she'd read, that under a blood moon, the desert mourns ancient spirits lost to drought and despair. That ring-shaped shadows were their watchers, sentinels of sorrow that gathered tears to feed the earth's wounds. She'd scoffed at the superstition. Now she knew it was truth. A sudden flurry of wing beats overhead distracted her. Bats darted from the rock fissures, their bodies like black arrows. The shadows recoiled, dissolving into the feathered swarm, dispersing into pockets of wind. Kalena risked a glance back. The circle of darkness stood empty once more. The tears pooled around it now still, like congealed blood, panting, bleeding. From a gash on her arm where she'd brushed against sharp rock, Kalena led her friends out of the canyon's maw. They spilled onto the flat, star-sprinkled plain, the moon still hidden behind the drifting veil. No sound but their ragged breathing, the echo of cicadas, the thrum of adrenaline thumping in their veins. "We made it," Troy whispered, voice hollow. Kalena pressed her hand against her side, where the wound ached hot and sticky. She spotted the camera lying in the dust, lens cracked, but instead of picking it up, she let it be. As they retraced their steps toward camp, she glanced back once more. The blood moon emerged, a bruised bruise in the sky, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw the ring-shaped shadow linger on the canyon wall, watching, waiting, weeping its rust-red tears into the stone. Then it was gone, and the moonlight shivered across the desert, innocent and deceptively serene. They would leave before dawn, burn their gear, and tell no one. But Kalena knew the desert would hold its secret ring-shaped and bleeding, a wound that would seep across the canyons whenever the moon turned red. And someday, someone else would wander into its morning song, and the shadows would rise to meet them, staining rock and flesh with tears of rust. A low, whining hum rose from the scrubland as the sun dipped below the horizon, staining the sky bruised purple. At first, it was nothing more than the daily groan of the turbine stall, skeletal figures turning endlessly against the wind. But tonight, when the horizon swallowed the last sliver of light, the turbines sang a different song. It began as a shiver at the base of the spine, a sensation that something in the air had changed. The blades cut through the wind with an odd rhythm, as if tracing words in a forgotten tongue. Mara Rossi leaned against the wooden railing of her back porch, arms wrapped around herself despite the warmth of the evening. She watched the turbines in the distance, their nacelles glowing faintly under the moon's half-light. The sound was growing louder, a rasping, layered chorus that seemed to come from every direction at once. She tried to focus on the distant silhouette, but the whine built into a roar that drowned out her thoughts. It felt alive. It felt hungry. A flash of lightning, dull and distant, illuminated the turbines, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw faces in the spinning shadows. Mouths open in silent screams, hollow eyes fixed on her. She shook her head, convinced her mind played tricks in the gathering gloom. Behind her, the screen door creaked. Her neighbor, Jonah Miller, stepped onto the porch, holding an old handheld recorder. "Did you hear that?" he asked, voice tight. She nodded. He raised the recorder toward the sound. On the small display, the audio level spiked erratically. Jonah's fingers trembled as he began to speak. Testing 1, 2. Suddenly, the device crackled with static, as though the turbines were feeding on its signal. The hiss deepened, and through it, faint voices whispered, so faint they might have been imagined. Mara leaned forward. "Jonah," she said, "did you hear?" He froze. The static cleared for a moment, and a voice cut through. "Help me. Help me." The tone was desperate, the plea ragged. Jonah jerked the recorder down. That can't be right." He pressed play. The same static, the same plea, looping. "It's coming from the turbines." Mara swallowed hard. We need to call someone. In the hours that followed, nothing Hollywood might call a solution materialized. The power company dispatched a technician, Lucius Carter, a gaunt man in oil-stained coveralls with a measured calm that unnerved Mara. He climbed the rusted staircase into the nacelle of the nearest turbine while Jonah and Mara watched from the ground. The recorder clutched between them. Once Lucius reached the top, he signaled down. Then he paused, head cocked, as though listening to something inaudible. Mara's heart pounded. Minutes later, the rotor began to turn faster, faster, the speed beyond safe limits. Lucius yelled. Down through the microphone he carried, "Get away from!" His voice fractured into static. A board beneath Mara's boot creaked. She turned to see Jonah's face pale against the glow of the coming dawn. The turbine's blades slowed abruptly, and Lucius's silhouette slipped out of view. He didn't climb down, he just vanished. Mara and Jonah drove to the service road's end, where the turbine towered like a monument to something too vast and inscrutable. They found the maintenance hatch open. Inside, Lucius's jacket lay draped over a control panel, his toolbox abandoned. No sign of a struggle, no footprints outside. Jonah's recorder crackled again, and through the static, the plea now came loud and clear. "Help me, please. I'm trapped." The days that followed were sleepless. At night, the turbines whispered across the plains, voices layering in overlapping harmonies, cries of despair, groans of hatred, laughter that scraped like metal on metal. The sound seeped into the farmhouse walls, burrowed into dreams, and turned sleep into a waking nightmare. Mara tried recording again, but each time the device fritzed out, screens flickering, memory cards corrupting. It was as though the turbines consumed not only sound but memory itself. Jonah became obsessed. He spent long nights parked under the turbines, recorder in hand, waiting for the voices to emerge. He cataloged patterns, pitch variations, anything that might hold a clue. His notebooks filled with strange notations. At 2:37 a.m., voices clear, 1 female, 2 male, save. U.S. please. When Mara asked him to stop, he only smiled, eyes wild. We have to know what they're saying. We have to help them. Town meetings were held in the community center, but the power company offered only mechanical explanations. Turbine resonance, faulty bearings, electromagnetic interference. Some residents believed it was mass hysteria. Wind farms were new. Here, only installed 2 years ago. Others whispered that the land had a history of violence, of settlers lost in storms, of railroad workers struck by lightning. A Depression-era family had vanished near these very fields. No records, no bodies found. Some nights, Mara imagined she heard hammering from beneath the ground, as though something tried to claw upward. One evening, Jonah proposed a plan. If the voices belonged to the lost, perhaps they were trapped between worlds, imprisoned by the turbine's rotating blades, caught in a loop of sound and wind. He suggested they enter the turbine himself, recording live to capture the raw signal. Mara begged him not to go, but he had become fragile, convinced only an act of faith could free the voices. The technician's disappearance loomed in everyone's mind. Yet Jonah pressed on. Under a thinning moon, they met at the base of the tower. Jonah carried only his recorder and a flashlight. Mara held a flare gun in her shaking hand. He climbed the ladder into the nacelle. She waited, wind whipping her hair, and the hum began, louder than ever. The blades above turned like mad sentinels, slicing the air in staccato beats that matched her racing pulse. Minutes passed, then a flashlight beam swung down the tower. Jonah appeared at the hatch. His eyes were empty pits. He dangled a recorder. "It's beyond." He paused, mouth twisting into a silent, malformed grin. The turbine roared, the voices shrieking now, as though threatened. Jonas dropped the recorder. It skidded on the metal floor and clattered down the shaft, the lens crackling with static. Mara fired the flare, the red light arcing upward, momentarily illuminating Jonah's gaunt face. He reached out for her, but his hand passed through her shoulder like mist. She reeled backward, flare gun clattering to the ground. The turbine's blade slowed, and Jonah's body collapsed through the hatch, landing on the earth with a hollow thunk. As she ran, the hum faded, replaced by the now familiar pleading, "Help me, help us, we're coming." Dawn found Mara alone on the service road, the turbines quiet in the pale light, their nacelles still. Jonah was gone, as if swallowed whole. By the night, the recorder lay nearby, its screen shattered. She picked it up, listening. Nothing but silence, drowned by her own quick breath. In the weeks that followed, the turbines were shut down for inspection. None of the workers could explain the mechanical anomalies, and no human intervention could recreate the static or the voices. Yet when the wind blew just right, the townspeople swore they heard someone calling for help, sometimes from the fields, sometimes from the empty skies. Mara moved away, but the memory clung to her. In her dreams, she still hears the plea, soft and echoing, as if the wind itself remembers those who never left the plains. And sometimes, late at night, she swears she feels a cold hand on her shoulder, urging her to return, to save them all before the turbines begin to turn yet again. The last time the fireball of Fredericksburg appeared, the sky over Willow Creek vineyards was a bruised purple, bleeding into deep midnight blue as the harvest moon slipped behind low clouds. The air was thick with the scent of damp oak barrels and fermenting grapes, and a dozen tourists leaned against the wooden railing of the tasting room deck, wine glasses half empty, cameras ready. They had heard the legend at the inn at Luckenbach how once every 10 years, without warning, a roaring sphere of flame would streak across this patch of Texas sky, and anyone who saw it up close would vanish in a split second, they thought. It was a story to spice the red blends, a campfire yarn to make for a better photo op. No one believed it was real until it shattered their disbelief into pulsing pieces of static. Was there with my cousin Josephine. We'd driven up from San Antonio that afternoon, GPS blinking 25 minutes off route as we climbed gravel roads through stands of cedar and mesquite. Josephine had been insistent. "We have to see it," she said, running her fingers over the tarnished brass label on her camera. She'd been obsessed since childhood, collecting every newspaper clipping, every faded postcard depicting a glowing orb arcing over the Lauterbach fields. I thought she'd outgrown it, but there she was, kneeling by the barrel-aged Cabernet, insisting I try a sip. She handed me her camera as the others murmured behind us, excited. The crowd hushed when the wind dropped. The cicadas' chorus dimmed to a droning undertone, and each of us turned instinctively north, toward the dark horizon. I didn't see at first the way your peripheral vision picks up movement too fast to grasp, but I heard it, a distant crack like lightning, but rolling like the world's throat clearing. My skin prickled, and I raised the camera. Josephine's fingers trembled against mine. Then it appeared, a sphere of incandescent orange that tore through the sky, leaving scorched ripples of heat in its wake. It moved faster than any meteor I'd seen or read about, yet you could track its path, a wide arc from the hilltops by Enchanted Rock, down over the vineyard rows, heading right toward us. It flared so bright that for an instant, the whole deck was bathed in hellish light, shadows slashing across faces in sharp relief. I swung the camera up, but the lens fogged and the viewfinder was a shimmering haze. Behind the glass I saw the sphere expand, veins of molten red crackling across its surface like burning veins. Then contract, pulsing as though alive. And then the world went silent. No cicadas, no wind, no murmured gasps. Only that impossible orb hanging above the ting-ting above the deck so close I could feel its heat scorch my cheeks. Josephine's eyes were wide, reflecting that terrible fire. She lifted her camera, voice hoarse. "It's beautiful," she whispered. I reached out to her, an instinct to protect, to pull her away, but before I could touch her hand, the sphere recoiled, snapping shut like a predator's maw, then exploded inward. There was no thunderous boom. Instead, it imploded in on itself, drawing the air out from around us, a vacuum of sound that pressed against our eardrums. I staggered backward, clutching the railing. The deck shuddered under my feet. When darkness rushed back in, the fireball was gone. The sky was empty again, the moon peeking out as if nothing had happened. But Josephine was gone too. Where she had knelt, framing the shot, there was only a broken wine glass rolling across the deck, its stem whisper-thin crack catching moonlight. And beside it lay her camera still warm from her grip, its display frozen on a view of empty air. The crowd screamed as they realized what had happened. One moment she had been there, the next nothing but static. Phones slipped from trembling hands onto the wooden planks. They huddled together, shining lights into the dusk, calling her name. But her voice never came. I bent and picked up her camera, the screen flickering with snow, random bursts of gray, and white that pinpricked the lens so no image could hold. I tried to scroll through, hoping to find a ghost of her smile or a trace of that fireball, but each tap brought more static until the device died altogether, black as oblivion. Someone called 911. Someone else said she must have slipped off the deck. They shone flashlights through the vineyard rows, picking through the leaves, peering into barrel cellars, finding only vines heavy with fruit and shadows that quivered. They called out again, louder, voices hollow in the night air. I stayed on the deck, the railing sticky with spilled Merlot, the broken shards of glass littering my shoes. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time felt like spilled wine, impossible to measure once it stains everything. Deputies finally arrived. Tall men with badges and torches, canvassing the scene, asking questions no one could answer. They treated it like a disappearance, lifting evidence, marking footprints that led nowhere. Their lights swept the horizon, sweeping past the treetops as if expecting the fireball to return. They never found Josephine. They never found proof of what happened. Days later, they called me in to sign papers, desperate to file an official missing persons report. The report said she'd probably wandered off. They'd find her in some county pound or lost and found. But I knew. I saw her vanish into that living flame, drawn inside its molten core until there was nothing left. Every 10 years, the fireball returns and the cycle repeats. There are always skeptics, tourists, and reporters, faint-hearted folklorists searching for closure, for a logical explanation. They comb through meteor databases, examine atmospheric readings, interview old man Lauterbach's grandson, who claims to have watched his own father disappear into the night. They find no answers, only more questions and a pile of static filled footage they can't decipher. A decade will pass and I'll return. I'll stand on that same deck, glass in hand, waiting for the crack in the flash, hoping I can spare someone else the fate Joanne met. But I won't be able to move in time. The fireball will sweep across the sky again, a roaring eye of flame that sees only what it wants. It will grow until it obliterates the distance between us, and whoever dares to look will be snatched away, leaving behind only their cameras, still recording the shape of nothing. And when the world exhales, the wine country will be silent again, the fields humming as if reminding itself that life goes on, even when someone is lost to the fire. The first time Hank Malone saw the thing, He thought it was a log crooked. Gnarled hunk of driftwood snagged on the bank like some nocturnal beast uneasy on dry land. He was alone, sitting on the creek's edge with his lines cast into water. Black as motor oil, the air thick with mosquitoes and the slow, wet scent of rot. It was summer, just past the solstice, and Crocodile Creek wore its name proudly snarling through the pines and cypress. Slow and treacherous, its banks dotted with white-barked cottonwoods that dripped with Spanish moss. Hank had fished this stretch since he was a boy, before he'd shoveled coal and before his wife, Marlene, left, leaving him with nothing but a rusted pickup and memories that tasted of stale beer. On that evening, the sun bled off the horizon, and the whole world seemed to hang between light and dark, breath held. That's when the log twitched. He blinked twice, then leaned forward, his rod thumping against the aluminum hull of his John boat. The crooked log, its shape more human than driftwood, shuddered, and a foot of it lifted, as if someone seated inside had stretched and rolled to a standing position. Hank's heart hammered harder than a rattlesnake's coil, but his fisherman's stubbornness wouldn't let him turn away. The thing stood on two knotted legs, arms folded at the chest like a sentinel. Its head was bowed, features vague, bark-crusted eye sockets staring downstream in eternal mourning. The creek hissed around it, black water swirling at its ankles. Hank's rod clattered to the floor. He pressed both fists to the gunwale, wishing he'd brought his pistol. It walked. Not the gliding shuffle of an alligator, but a deliberate, dragging step, one foot lifted, the other set down, toes splintering bark into the muddy bank. The thing moved toward him. The evening breeze kicked up and carried voices, so many tiny voices whispering from the logs that floated downstream after heavy rains, voices that sounded like children crying. Hank's ears rang. He wanted to scream, but his voice was caught. Like a fishbone in his throat, the boat tipped. He grabbed the tiller, cut the engine, and let the current pull him a few yards back. Water sloshing over the edges, smelling of rot and something fouler, something metallic. The figure stopped at the waterline and stared at him with those empty hollows. And then it tilted its head, and Hank knew that wherever he looked, whatever instrument he raised, binoculars, rifle scope, a pair of clear eyes, it would stare back, empty and accusing. The next morning, the creek was calm, silent as a tomb. Hank returned with two other fishermen, George and Billy Ray, convinced he'd drank too much moonshine. They laughed when he told them what he'd seen. Old Hank's fishing tall tailies, Billy Ray said, snapping sunscreen across his cheek. But when they passed the crooked log the next bend upstream, they all, and this was the thing, swore it raised an arm and pointed downstream, like a warning. George's sunburned face went pale. Billy Ray cursed, aimed his Smith & Wesson at the bank, and fired. The bullet pinched off something hard, crocodile scales, perhaps, or more likely more wood. The log thumped twice, and then the thing took a step back into the trees, vanishing into cypress knees and bramble. They didn't wait to see where. Instead, they motored back in silence, as if afraid the engine noise itself might summon it. Word spread through the cabins and campgrounds: don't fish at dusk. Don't collect driftwood. Don't even look at the creek after sundown. Locals spoke of disappearances. A boy named Eli Turner who vanished during a camping trip, his tent empty except for a pair of muddy footprints leading into the water. An old woman, May Louise, who drowned waiting for minnows, though witnesses claimed her fishing basket floated back upstream, heavy with logs carved like human limbs. And every morning someone found more logs shapely as torsos, arms raised in eternal pleas, or twisted legs that bent backward like some perverse ballet. The sheriff, a stoic man named Rollins, wrote the creek off as a hazard. Keeps people away from illegal dumping, keeps the nerds from fossil hunting. He refused to draw media attention, but tourists still came, cameras slung around their necks. open their eyes bleeding away by nightfall. I came because I heard the story over cold beer in a dive bar on State Highway 59. I was chasing prompts. Strange. Folktales and unrecorded legends when an old man by the jukebox told me Crocodile Creek was alive. It feeds on trespassers, he said, throat as gravelly as the creek bed. Pulls them in like driftwood, and next dusk, you'll see them walking back upstream. I thought it a joke. So I rented a beat-up canoe and paddled in at twilight. My recorder clicking, nerves jangling like wind chimes. The water lapped at the hull, crickets tuned up in the pines, and somewhere downstream, frogs barked. I drifted into a widening curve where the water slowed and blackened. That's when I saw them, logs piled like bodies on a half-submerged bar, shapes stacked 2 and 3 deep. I strapped a GoPro to the bow rail. I waded ashore to get closer, camera rolling, and one of the logs a nearly perfect cast of a human. Chest shuddered its clavicle, rolled, and pulled itself free. Mud peeled from its fingers. It wheezed like an arthritic man. I snapped back to the canoe, but my foot tangled in a submerged root. I plunged in, freezing water to my waist, the recorder bouncing in the boat. The logs stirred behind me, and I paddled hard but drifted backward. In the surface glare, I saw 2 logs rise side by side, arms stretching, knuckled hands outstretched toward me. My paddle broke against a hidden rock. I tumbled forward, headfirst into the creek. I hit bottom, knee first, pain flaming through my leg. I lay face down, heart pounding, splashing, and waited for my head to clear before surfacing. I gasped and blinked at dusk sky, and that's when it was inches from me. A man-shaped log, face pattern of bark and mold, eye sockets wet with dark water. It reached long limbs bending in implausible angles, and for a moment I recognized something in its stance, a posture of supplication, arms folded, head bowed, limbs nodding like sinew. It hissed through fissures in the wood, 1,000 tiny voices begging for release. My camera went under. I shook my head and rose, dragging my shattered paddle, body shaking with cold and fear. I got to the canoe, half submerged and clawed. Aboard. The creek waters closed above me, and I gripped the gunwale, shivering in the silence that followed. I never looked at the footage. I didn't need to. I limped back to the bar where I'd met the others, and over another beer, I watched a news clip of Crocodile Creek. 2 fishermen capsized and the sheriff's department retrieving their boat. Empty seats and rod holders still clutched by sopping lines. Then the camera panned to the bank just beyond the searchlights where dozens of logs lay in neat rows. Shapes that looked like people, reclining, hands across chests. The correspondent said no bodies, no missing persons reports. Just driftwood, he said. I turned off the TV. They say at nightfall, the logs awaken and make their journey upstream, carrying with them the souls of those who drowned or wandered off into dark waters. They travel in silence, the messages they carry lost in the mud and the rot. Some believe the curse began with a logjam long ago when a steamship busted a trestle and dumped its cargo of captives bound for a plantation on the other side. Bodies entangled in cypress knees, left to decay in the eddies, rose again as wood-shaped specters. Others whisper of native rituals and angry spirits that lurk in the eddies. The truth dissolves like mist at sunrise. What remains is simple. The creek is hungry. It collects us, carves us into its driftwood, and when the sun dips low, it suns. U.S. home, and I am here to tell you, if you value your soul, stay out of Crocodile Creek at dusk, because those logs you pull in by daylight will walk back upstream after dark, and they will carry you with them. The evening sky over U.S. Highway 281 was cobalt bleeding into black when Mary saw. First heard it a distant swell of voices drifting across the two-lane ribbon of asphalt, clear as prayer, yet impossible. She was halfway between Fredericksburg and Blanco, headed south after a late shift at the diner. The road all but empty except for her old Chevy's headlights and the hush that pressed against the windows. The choir came drifting down the breeze like a hymn from an open grave, soprano purity weaving through the hum of her engine. She eased off the gas and glanced at the rearview. No other cars, no trucks. Just empty highway and mesquite shadows. Pooling alongside the pavement, she tapped the radio knob. Static. No gospel station that far out. No towns within miles broadcasting anything but the wind. Still, the music pulled her forward, insistent as salvation. The voices rose in a gentle crescendo, voices of women, men, children, holy and mournful. Marisol's heart thumped time with each note. She thought of her grandmother's church back in San Antonio, the chorus lifting every Sunday until her chest ached with longing. Tonight, though, the sound was cut from different cloth. Hollow, faintly metallic, a promise and a threat all at once. The road curved past a stand of live oak, limbs gnarled like praying hands. There, set back nearly 100 yards from the highway, stood a small white church, steeple fractured, paint peeling in long tiers, doors yawning open. A faded sign read, Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe, the letters like chipped tombstones. Beneath it, someone had scrawled in red illegible, dripping. Marisol killed the engine. The choir, now just a whisper, invited her closer. Brake lights painting the pavement crimson, she stepped onto the gravel drive. Gravel shifted under her boots, skittering like bones. The voices drifted through the open doors, soft, a lullaby laced with sorrow. She swallowed. Her throat felt dry, her pulse hammering in her ears. She pushed the doors. Hinges screamed in protest, echoing down the nave. The choir came clearer now, all around her, floating above the rows of pews. But the pews were not wooden. Benches, they were glossy and wet, as though coated in varnish, though the shine pulsed and wriggled beneath the lantern glow. Marisol froze, pulse stuttering. She crouched and touched the surface with a fingertip. The pew trembled alive. Something slithered beneath the lacquer. Veins, pulsing, iridescent. Her skin crawled. The wood grain shifted like skin tightening. Around sinew, breathing. The choir rose in volume, a tide of voices without a source, floating above the altar like angry spirits. Marisol pressed her palm to her mouth, a sharp gasp leaving her throat. She turned to run, but the doors slammed shut on their own, the slamming echo swallowed by laughter and broken hymns. Voice whispered her name, hard to catch but certain. Guadalupe. The name rolled over her mind like stones. A dozen voices whispered it, hungry. She staggered back, nearly tripping over the center aisle. The floorboards were slick too, quivering as though the church itself was alive. As her foot slid, she saw shapes beneath the surface, hands pale and delicate, pressed against the underside of the boards, sliding in and out of sight like drowned souls yearning for air. The floor shuddered beneath her, blood turning cold in her veins. Behind the altar, the stained glass window fractured by time-caught moonlight, Nuestra Senora's face pale, eyes hollow. But now the image rippled as though the glass were liquid. The Virgin's lips parted in a silent scream that spread shockwaves through the room. The choir swelled and fractured in unison, a discordant swirl that rattled Marisol's skull. She turned to leave, but the pews strained and leaned, groaning as they extended long, slender limbs. The living benches crept toward her unknotted, roots aiming to trap her in their embrace. She lunged for the door, yanking at the handle. The choir's lament rose to a wail as the benches closed in. She ripped the doors again. They budged a fraction. Heart thundering, she planted her shoulder, shoved hardwood buckled under her weight. She burst through into the night, gravel, sprang under her feet and hit the highway, scrambling until she found her car. Hands trembling, she yanked the door open and dove inside, slamming it shut as the choir's wail sliced the air behind her. Marisol fumbled for the keys. Her reflection in the rear window was pale, eyes wide. The engine roared to life. She threw the car in reverse, tires spinning, then whipped onto the overtaking lane and pointed south with everything she had. She did not look back, though. Voices seemed to chase her, clinging to the chassis, rattling her skull. Behind her, the empty church stood under the moon, silent as a gravestone. But at its doors, the choir pressed their bodies against the threshold, faces pressed to broken. Glass, mouths moving in silent song. Veins pulsing under skin, skin shifting like wood. Deep within the church, the pews dripped with something sticky. It ran down legs to pool on the floor, dark and warm, alive. The choir beckoned travelers, promising solace, salvation, a place to rest. And those who followed would find sanctuary of a different sort. The pews would cradle them forever, their voices joining the chorus of hungry souls, alive and wet in the roadside gospel of Guadalupe. The first time I saw the light, I thought my eyes were playing tricks of will-o'-the-wisp off in some scrubby cedar thicket, the kind of thing you'd swear you saw when you'd had too many Lone Stars at Joe's Tavern. But when it swept across Main Street, cutting people out of existence like a silent guillotine, I knew there was nothing natural about it. Llano sat under a full sky, sharp as blown glass. The hills all around bled into soft shadows. Along the ridge above town, where the scrub pine gave way to granite outcrops, stood the old metal tower no taller than a telephone pole, its framework rusted and pockmarked, but atop it, a lighthouse beacon spun, casting a brilliant cone of white light. At nearly 200 miles from the coast, it should never have belonged there. I'd grown up in Llano, wandered its side streets and stared out over the grasslands as a kid, chasing jackrabbits and counting rattlesnakes. I knew its low-slung houses, its crooked church steeple, the diner where old men smoked Miss Lulus and talked politics they'd forgotten. But I didn't know what hid behind the hills, and I never expected to find a sea beacon perched on solid rock. When the light first came on just before midnight on a moonless night, most of us were asleep, tucked in our beds to the low hum of cicadas. Those few who saw it said they heard no motor, no click of a switch, only the hush of air, like someone exhaling. The first disappearance happened at the rest stop on Highway 71. A lone trucker, 10 minutes outside of town, saw the beam cut across the asphalt, sweeping past his rig like a searchlight from heaven. He stepped into its path and vanished. His truck stayed, engine running, the cab door open, the driver's logbook flipped to a blank page. When deputies found only a muddy footprint leading into the mesquite, they shrugged it off except for Deputy Morales, who saw his own daughter's face in the mud dot. After that, the light grew bolder. It came every night around the same time, 12:03 a.m., precise as church bells, tracing a slow arc from the diner window straight through the cemetery, across the park where the displaced steam engine sat rusting. We learned to stay indoors, to cover our windows with blankets, but blankets don't stop light. One evening, my neighbor's 15-year-old Sarah begged to see it. She pressed her face to the window, and I remember her voice cracking as the beam found her. She didn't scream. I think whatever pulled her out made her mouth lock shut. The next morning, her mother found only her pink ballet slipper in the grass beneath the window, its satin ribbon still tied. The town's old-timers men who'd spent their lives yanking pecan logs out of the Llano River said it was the ghost of some lighthouse keeper, shipwrecked when the ocean dried up. Others whispered of an alien device dropped from a craft that hovered over the plane for a heartbeat before disappearing. We tried every explanation. A prank, a military experiment gone wrong, some weird optical phenomenon. Nobody believed it. Was natural. I decided to climb the hill to see what powered that spinning light. I packed a backpack with water, an old hunting knife, and my father's revolver. He'd carried it from '62 until the day he died, just in case. I left at dusk, walking the back trails past the granitic boulders that looked for all the world like the hulking shapes of sleeping dinosaurs. By the time I reached the tower, the amber glow of sunset had given way to a starless black. The beacon stood silent, its lens cracked in one place, the metal grating around it bent inward as though something had tried to claw its way out. Ran my fingers over the switch at its base, no resistance, no click. Crouching, I peered into the glass chamber where the bulb should have been. It was empty. The mechanism was gone, yet the light spun and burned as if it fed on darkness itself. A low whisper curled around me, like breath across my ear, and for a moment I thought I heard Sarah's voice saying, "Help me." I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and the beam caught me. It cut across my chest, a swooping arc of white, so pure it hurt my eyes. I felt a coldness seep in, starting at my toes and racing up my legs. I fought the urge to fall, to let the dark take me, but I forced my feet to move. I scrambled down the slope, guided only by memory, until I burst through the cedar and tumbled into the yard behind my childhood home. Inside, I poured whiskey into a chipped glass and stared at the window. The light hadn't reached me here, not yet. But I felt it in my bones, or maybe in my skin. It was crawling under my shirt, tracing veins like blue fire. In the mirror, my eyes were too bright, pupils shrinking into pinpoints. I knew I had moments to live, or maybe seconds. I grabbed my phone, called the sheriff. My voice was ragged. "It's in the hills. It's real." He barked orders, "Get to the station, don't look at the thing," and I hung up, fumbling for the medicine cabinet. My grandfather's old binoculars sat there. I put them in my pack along with the glass and the knife. Outside, the night was quiet. The porch light fractured the lawn into gold and black. I looked back at the tower, that lone beacon atop Llano Hill, and the sweep of its beam revealed empty fields where families once stood. Not even a footprint or a tuft of hair remained. The land was clean. They found me at dawn, slumped against the station door, phone clutched in one hand, whiskey in the other. My eyes were still dilated, reflecting the pale blue morning sky. I couldn't speak. Words had slipped away somewhere on that hill. The deputies shone flashlights on my face as they carried me inside. By afternoon, half the town was gone. The rest huddled in ruined houses, drawing blinds, whispering prayers. The sheriff posted a notice: "Stay indoors until further notice. Do not approach the tower." But the light didn't wait for permission. That night at 12:03, it found my window. I watched the beam creep across the floor toward my bed, a silent predator circling its prey. I knew it would take me, and a part of me wanted it to. The darkness it carried was kinder than this light, kinder than knowing what it did to people. As the beam hugged the edge of the mattress, I closed my eyes and felt the warmth wash over me. When morning came, my bed was empty, the sheets folded neatly as if I'd never occupied them. On the floor lay my father's revolver, its cylinder open and empty, and the binoculars, lenses shattered. The sheriff found only a chair pulled up to the window, looking out toward the hills. Waiting. Llano remains empty now, a town of ghosts and locked doors. The beacon still sits on the hill, turning and searching, its hunger never sated. And sometimes, in the pitch of night, you can hear a whisper drifting on the wind, a voice calling from the dark fields, begging for release or perhaps offering it. Whatever it is, it never stops, and neither does the light.